Chapter 1483. But if the Grand Duke of Blindness was willing to cooperate, it would be completely different. Nobody knew a son better than his father. With this person's help, it would be extremely easy to find Ivan. In this way, it would save a lot of time. Of course, it was normal to pay some price for this. Everything depended on what the other party asked for. The Grand Duke of Blindness sat there in silence for a long time, weighing the gains and losses in his heart. In the end, he sighed and said, "In that case, I have 3 conditions." Try to say it. Yang Chendong did not arrogantly say that he would agree even if the Grand Duke of Blindness had 100 conditions. He also answered very cautiously. It was enough to prove that he was very cautious when facing an opponent at the level of the Grand Duke of Blindness. First, please keep the name of Moscow. Please also leave some people who are not a threat in your eyes. After all, this is the place where the Ross clan lived. We still need them to stay as witnesses. At least we won't let them disappear from this land so quickly and prove that the Ross clan was once the owner of this place. After the Grand Duke of Blindness finished speaking, he looked expectantly at Yang Chendong's reaction. In this regard, Yang Chendong just urged, there are 2 more conditions. Say them together. Second, I can help you find Ivan, but you have to promise not to hurt him and you have to swear a heavy oath. Also, you can't kill the 5,000 palace guards. You can give them to Ivan to lead. I will persuade him to become a foreign division in your Han army. Presumably, you still have a lot of places to fight and occupy, so you will always need manpower. Since you are so optimistic about Ivan's strength, presumably his addition will make you like a tiger that has grown wings, right? Third, I want the heads of Nikev and Peter. They betrayed us, so they must pay the price. That's all. As long as Bugnam of Gojoseon can agree, I will do my best to help you. I will even come forward to appease the hearts of the people in the city. You know, these people have feelings for this Grand Duke. Many of them are still willing to believe me. The 3 conditions were stated by the Grand Duke of Blindness. Next, it was time to wait for Yang Chendong's reply. In this regard, Yang Chendong, who was smiling, had a mocking look in his eyes. She had already become a prisoner, so how could she still make such an outrageous request? Was it because the other party was used to being domineering, or was it because he was too gentle? He decided to let the other party know who had the final say in this place at this moment. I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill any of your 3 conditions. While objecting, Yang Chendong continued, it seems that some people still don't understand the situation. Do you really think that we can't find Ivan without your help? The more he spoke, the colder Yang Chendong's expression became. Men, bring those 5,000 palace guards to the square and kill them all. Yes, young master. Young heir, who had been waiting at the side for a long time, was waiting for these words. He agreed and turned around to leave. The blind duke was forced to panic. Wait a minute. He didn't expect Yang Chendong to be so decisive. Since it was a negotiation, of course one side would offer a sky-high price, and the other side would pay back the money. How could one flip the table just because one side disagreed? If that was the case, how could the game not continue? Of course, through this test, he could also see that Yang Chendong was not the nobles he had come into contact with before. This was a very principled and powerful person. He would not tolerate the slightest doubt or criticism from others. The Grand Duke of Blindness shouted for Yang Chendong to stop. He lowered his head and asked Yang Chendong to propose amendments. And this was exactly what he wanted. His performance just now was just to intimidate the blind duke. Reality also proved that a paper tiger was a paper tiger. As expected, he was not intimidated. All right, since that's the case, this king will propose the final regulations. When he said, final, it meant that the following words could not be questioned or refuted. If the blind duke still did not agree, then there was nothing to talk about. First, all the people in the city must be evacuated. Not a single one is left. This is unquestionable. Not even the slightest trace of your people can be left here. Second, as long as Ivan performs well, he can be spared and be given a chance to redeem himself. But he will always be watched. Once he is found to be disloyal, he will be beheaded without mercy. On the other hand, if he is willing to work honestly, this king can guarantee that he will not be killed. As for the 5,000 guards, only 500 of them can be allocated. The other 4,500 will be sent to other armies. You should know that it is impossible for this person to have too much military power before he has enough trust. Also, as the Grand Duke, you also need to make a public speech to express your submission to us, the Han people. This is also an important reason for your son's safety. As for the third point, Nekov and the others are traitors in your eyes, but in this king's eyes, they are meritorious people. It is impossible to harm them. It is best if you understand this point. Even if you don't, you have to understand. With the same unquestionable tone, Yang Chendong refuted the 3 points raised by the blind duke. It could even be said that this was not just a rebuttal. 2 of the 3 points had been directly rejected. Even the remaining point had been discounted, and Yang Chendong had even taken the opportunity to raise his own opinion. Normally, such an answer would not satisfy the Grand Duke of Blindness. But the other party actually quickly nodded in agreement. Good, I hope Bugnam of Gojoseon can keep his promise. Otherwise, this duke will not let you go even if I die and become a ghost. My Rasi people will also disturb your peace. When he said these words, although the blind duke's eyes revealed an unquestionable momentum, there was a trace of craftiness in his eyes. It was clear that this answer had already satisfied him. Originally, what the blind duke wanted was the safety of his son. Through the conversation with Yang Chendong just now, he already knew that the Han man in front of him, Bugnam of Gojoseon, had strong means, strong capital, and superb abilities that had exceeded his previous expectations. Unless this person died one day, it would be a nightmare for anyone to be his enemy, and there was no chance of winning. His son could not be this person's opponent. Since that was the case, it was better to submit to this person. There was nothing safer than this. Only by ensuring his own safety could he have the opportunity to look forward to his own grand plan. And once something happened to Yang Chendong, it would be the day when the Rasi clan rose again. The blind duke did not doubt what Yang Chendong said to him. Although he also knew that moving the entire city out one by one and screening them one by one was indeed a very laborious task and would take a lot of time, it was undeniable that this was indeed a good way to find Ivan. If he really could not find Ivan, he did not doubt that this young king would rather kill all the unidentified people in the city. Once he really did that, it would be unknown how many heads would fall to the ground. It would also be tantamount to completely destroying the hope of the Rasi clan's rise. In contrast, this was what he could not tolerate. As long as there was still hope, it was worth it for the blind duke to do anything. He seemed to be a person who was born to make the Rasi clan strong and was willing to do anything for this goal, even death. He was not even afraid of death. It was just agreeing to a few of Yang Chendong's conditions. What was the big deal? Astonishment flashed across Yang Chendong's face when the Grand Duke of Blindness agreed to the conditions so readily. Seeing this, the Grand Duke of Blindness finally revealed a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. What? Bugnam of Gojoseon, don't tell me you want to go back on your word? Go back on my word? How is that possible? Yang Chendong shouted as if someone had stepped on his sore spot. He looked like he was pretending to be a tough guy. Since these words came from this king will certainly fulfill his promise. Then it's a deal. Next, I'll have to ask Bugnam of Gojoseon to invite some people to be witnesses. You know, if there's no guarantee, I won't dare to trust my former enemy. You would do the same. The blind duke was happy that his plan had succeeded. Of course. Yang Chendong also looked like he was willing to accept his loss. Then he snapped his fingers and ordered someone to call over the high-ranking generals of the 5-star army in Moscow and a group of senior officials from the Rasi kingdom. He wanted to swear in front of everyone to prove that he was serious and at the same time dispel the blind duke's doubts. After doing all this, Yang Chendong seemed to be in a bad mood. It will take some time for these people to come. This king is a little tired and needs to rest now. After saying that, he turned and left without waiting for the blind duke's reaction. Beta Persei followed him. When the two walked out of the hall, Beta Persei saw that there was no one around, so he hurried to Yang Chendong's side and said, "Young master, did that old guy make you angry?" If so, this little one will go back and kill him now. That way, no one will know the content of the previous conversation. No need. Yang Chendong replied with a smile. Where was the angry look from just now? Just as the blind duke asked for a sky-high price, why wouldn't he pay? No one knew Ivan's power better than him. If he didn't find such a person, he wouldn't even be able to sleep in peace. In contrast, it was just agreeing to some of the other party's conditions. What was the big deal? Don't forget that Yang Chendong swore that as long as Ivan didn't rebel, he wouldn't do anything to him. But the other party was originally an ambitious person. As long as the opportunity was right, how could he not rebel? Chapter 1484. What if there's no chance? Yang Chendong can create opportunities for him. I don't believe that the other party won't fall into my trap. If that's the case, I won't feel guilty at all after killing this person, and all the efforts of the blind Archduke today will be in vain. It was with this idea that Yang Chendong reluctantly agreed to the other party's second request. As for deliberately pretending to be angry, it was just to confuse the blind Archduke and not give the other party a chance to regret. After all, even if all the people in the city were moved out, they might not necessarily be able to find Ivan. What if the other party hid in a certain tunnel in the city and didn't go out? Could it really be possible to tear down the entire Moscow city and dig 3 feet into the ground? How much time and cost would it take? It was just for a person who didn't have the ability to pose a threat, so it was really a bit of a fuss. With their own thoughts, everyone was quickly summoned. In front of everyone, Yang Chendong made an oath in the name of King Wunan of Damyang that as long as the blind Archduke found Ivan and sent him to him, not only would he not kill this person, but he would also give this person the power to lead troops. He also promised that unless this person rebelled or made a real move, Yang Chendong would never kill this person. Violating this oath would incur the wrath of the gods. Yang Chendong made a statement in public, and the blind Archduke was overjoyed. In front of everyone he proposed several locations, and the well-prepared black cavalry divided into several groups to search for him. About an hour later, a stooped Ross clan man dressed in civilian clothes appeared in the hall. In the past, there were many people who pretended to be crazy in order to achieve great things. For example, Go Jian, who endured hardships, could even eat feces when he was crazy. Mr. Zhu Di of the Great Ming Dynasty also pretended to be crazy for a long time in order to dispel Zhu Yunwen's suspicion of him at that time. It was just that Yang Chendong had never seen those people, unlike the current Ivan, who he saw with his own eyes. He didn't know what was applied on his face, but it made his skin look a lot older. There were more wrinkles on his face, showing that he was far older than his age. There was also that stooped body, which didn't seem artificial at all, as if he was born like this. Coupled with that silly smile, he really looked like a mentally retarded child. There was no trace of the young and high-spirited young Master Yi Fan in his every move. He didn't seem to have the temperament that a noble should have, but Yang Chendong was still very sure that the other party was Ivan. Otherwise, the black cavalry wouldn't have brought such a person into the hall. Just as Yang Chendong was looking at this fool who the black cavalry said was sleeping in a horse barn, the blind Grand Duke, who was also standing in the hall, suddenly spoke. "My son, Ivan, your father-in-law has already talked to the King Wunan of Damyang. You won't be guilty, and you still have the right to lead the troops. Now, please restore your true body." As soon as these words came out of his mouth, the stooped man standing in the hall, whose eyes were originally dim, suddenly shone brightly. Then, the man suddenly straightened his body like a magic trick. As he stretched out his hand, some of the disguises on his face were also removed. A spirited and handsome young man in his 20s appeared in front of everyone. How could those who knew Ivan not recognize him? Who else could he be if he wasn't the wise young Master Ivan of the Ross clan, who was predicted to appear once in a few hundred years? "I finally caught you." Yang Chendong saw everyone's reaction and revealed a victorious smile on his face. At the same time, he was also shocked. Thinking about it, if this person was really dressed like this, even if everyone in the city had to go through a sieve, they might not be able to find him. And if he let him escape, he was really worried that the new Second Army commander, Sherbet, who was left behind to guard the city, might not be able to defeat him. Ivan was finally found. Yang Chendong also fulfilled his promise and gave him the position of Chiliarch, which consisted of 500 ordinary Mongolian soldiers and 500 palace guards. Anyone could see that the 500 Mongolian soldiers were there to keep an eye on Ivan and prevent him from doing anything that would endanger the 5-star army. With Ivan captured, the Rossi duchies no longer had any chance to make a comeback. Yang Chendong could finally rest assured and bid farewell to the Rossi duchies and prepare to leave. Before that, the new Second Army was also formed. Unexpectedly, the officers used were basically the same as the original members of the new Second Army. The commanders were Qiao Chao, the commander of the 104th Army, Li Jun, the commander of the 105th Army, Wu Hui, the commander of the 106th Army, Yang Chunfeng, the commander of the 107th Army, and Su Liang, the division commander of the army. The 4 division commanders were all promoted by 1 rank and became division commanders. The original division commander Su Liang was also promoted by 2 ranks and was promoted to division commander. The reason why all of them were recruited was to make it easier for Sherbet to manage them. Everyone was familiar with each other and could save a lot of time. Secondly, this place was remote and not many people were willing to come. Even if they were willing to come, it would take time. Since that was the case, it was better to put these people to good use first. As for whether they were suitable or not, time would tell. If it really didn't work out, he could just change them again. At the same time that the new Second Army was established, Yang Chendong established the Far East Army in the name of the Army Commander-in-Chief. The commander was Chen Bo, and the division commander under the army was Dai Qua of the 108 Army, Kong He of the 109 Army, Shi Xiaolin of the 110 Army, Ma Hong of the 111 Army, and the division commander Wu Ba of the army. Similarly, the old members of the Far Eastern Army were promoted, and the division commander was promoted to division commander. In this way, it meant that there were a total of 8 armies and 2 division commanders in this area. Even if something happened, these people were enough to solve the problem and there was no need to transfer troops from outside. After giving 2 orders in a row, Yang Chendong was ready to leave Eastern Europe. Speaking of which, it had been 3 years since he led the troops into the Far Eastern region. It was much longer than the time needed to conquer any land. Fortunately, the harvest this time was big enough and the territory was enough. The slaves and gold and silver seized were also far beyond his expectations. At the end of August, 1463 AD, Yang Chendong gathered a total of 400,000 troops, including the world's 1st Cavalry Army, the 3rd Cavalry Army, the Cold Front 2nd Division, a total of 100,000 troops, 100,000 Russian troops, and 200,000 Mongolian troops. For the difference, the Mongolian troops were the enemy, and the Mongolian troops were the surrendered troops, and were a part of the 5-star army. Setting out from the city of Moscow, with the pretext of pursuing Shamask, the leader of the Cherkass people, and Maxim, the leader of the Novgorod city-state, the troops were directed towards the Rossi principalities and the Lithuanian state, which was located to the south of the present Eastern European province. Before this, the leader of the Alans, Malayan, Tugnev of Yatka, and Vanya of Pskov were either killed by the 5-star army, or they surrendered due to their powerful strength. Only a few generals such as Shamask and Maxim managed to escape. Even so, the number of troops they brought with them when they escaped was very limited, only 20 to 30,000 people in total. However, Yang Chendong still chased after them with the 400,000 troops, which was more or less like using a cannon to kill a mosquito. However, there was an ulterior motive. The 5-star army needed a reason to expand their territory, and they also needed an excuse. At the end of the 9th month of the year 1463, the 400,000 men of the 5-star army captured the capital of Lithuania, which was trying to shelter Shamask and the others. Lithuania was thus destroyed and became another part of the Yang faction. Unfortunately, they still couldn't find Shamask and the others. But it didn't matter, there was already news that they escaped to Poland with their troops, so they just had to continue the chase. Therefore, the 5-star army's 400,000 troops continued to move forward, taking down Poland, Hungary, and other small countries. They brushed past the border of the Roman Empire and entered Serbia, Bulgaria, and other small countries. Facing the aggressive Han army, these countries had no choice but to surrender as if they were repeating the scene of the Mongol Empire many years ago. In the end, the Five-Star Army successfully took down the Byzantine Empire that surrendered and appeared behind the Ilkhanate. Right now, it was already February 1464 AD. It was snowing heavily, and it hindered the traffic. As a result, the Five-Star Army had no choice but to stop and rest. Relying on their military cotton coats and warm down jackets, as well as high-waisted riding boots, even in the coldest weather, the Five-Star Army soldiers rarely lost any members because of this. This was the benefit of having powerful equipment. How could an army wearing thin clothes be a match for the Five-Star Army in warm jackets? However, not everyone was a Han soldier who fought against the M Empire and supported the Empire, and they had a strong sense of trust and obedience. The achievements that the Five-Star Army had achieved along the way, as well as the glory that they had created, had already spread throughout this region. If it weren't for the heavy snow, they would have stopped and killed their way here. Harsinhan of the Ilkhanate was the closest to the Five-Star Army, and he was the most nervous one. Even though the heavy snow made it hard to travel, Harsinhan still used every second he had and wandered around, trying to find more reinforcements. Finally, he managed to convince Khan Amur of the Timur Empire. Under his influence, more and more Khan came together and held a military meeting to defend against the Five-Star Army. Great Khan Amur. His name, in Mongolian, means peace. In fact, he wanted to be a peaceful Khan and live a peaceful life. But in reality, life rarely went as planned. Chapter 1485. The Timur Empire could be said to be in existence not inferior to the Golden Horde. Moreover, because of the lush grasslands around it, their development was rather fast. But it was precisely because of this favorable environment that ambitious people appeared one after another. The originally large Timur Empire was thus divided into several clans, like the Norman Khanate, the Ilkhanate, the Kazakh Khanate, the Crimean Khanate, and the Kazan Khanate. They were all once part of this empire. From this, one could see just how powerful the Timur Empire was. If not for the fact that it was divided, no one around it would be a match for it. These Khanates, who usually had their own agendas, were finally able to come together in the face of the powerful enemy, the Five-Star Army. Within the tent of Great Khan Amur, Saihan Khan of the Norman Khanate, Hassan Khan of the Ilkhanate, Janilbek Khan of the Kazakh Khanate, Haji Khan of the Crimean Khanate, Ali Khan of the Kazan Khanate, as well as Yangsulu and Ili of the Yusang tribes, had gathered together King Bao Lide. Thanks to the heavy snow, these leaders, who had been nervous about the war, were able to gather together and discuss important matters. From this, one could see just how much pressure the Five-Star Army from the Byzantine Empire was exerting on them. Fortunately, none of them had been idle in this period of time. They had been constantly clashing with the Five-Star Army from the east, so they were already used to the rhythm of war. They weren't that afraid, and after such a long period of war, they were no longer as fearful of cannons as before. But this didn't mean that they weren't afraid of the Five-Star Army. On the contrary, when they learned that the commander of the Five-Star Army behind them was King Wunan of Daemyong, every member of the conference became extremely cautious. They had heard far too much about this Yang Chendong. Just the titles he had given him were numerous. For example, the most basic title of King Wunan of Daemyong, the title of Heavenly Khan given to them by the grassland, and titles like God of War and God of War. No matter which one it was harsh to the ears, especially the title of Heavenly Khan. In many people's hearts, only their ancestor Genghis Khan could use this title, but now it was used by a Han. This was equivalent to a loud slap to their faces, causing them to blush. But even though they knew this, there was nothing they could do. Facing the Five-Star Army from the east, they could only fight to a draw at most. This was because they had a vast space and complex terrain, which allowed the cavalry to unleash their greatest advantage and suppress the less mobile cannons. This time, facing the Five-Star Army from the west, one could imagine what their chances of victory were. Are you really Han Chinese? Is that really the King Wunan of Daemyong? Among the crowd, the Kazakh Khaganate's Khan, Janilbek, said with an angry face. It was no wonder that he would think this way. In the past, when they faced Han Chinese, if they could win, they would take advantage of them and plunder them. If they couldn't win, they would run away. At most, they would write a letter and acknowledge the other party as their master. After a period of time, when they had recovered enough strength, they would be able to launch another expedition. But as a Han Chinese, this Bugnam of Gojoseon did not accept this at all. Wherever he attacked, it would become the territory of the other party. This person would also ferociously move the locals away and make some people who did not belong here live here. This was equivalent to completely erasing everything that once existed here. This was equivalent to cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. They did not accept surrender, nor did they accept the exchange of benefits. Regarding this point, Janierbek Khan could be said to have experienced it personally. His younger brother Kalai was unfortunately captured by the 5-star army. For this matter, he had communicated with the other party many times. He had taken money and wanted to lower his head and acknowledge the other party as his master, but he only wanted to save his brother and not start a war. He wanted peace. Unfortunately, the other party did not accept this at all. The emissary he sent was sent back, but the money he brought was left behind. If they were bandits, then the 5-star army were bandits who specialized in robbing bandits. It was really hateful, but there was nothing they could do. This was not consistent with the actions of the Han Chinese. Yang Chendong's actions naturally caused Janierbek Khan to question whether the other party was a Han Chinese. And when he said this, at least a few people in the tent showed an expression of agreement. Obviously, they also had the same thoughts. Enough. Seeing that the topic of the meeting was going astray, Amor finally spoke up. With a very serious tone, he said, "Now is not the time to talk about this. Let's think about how to deal with them. We have already received reports that the Golden Horde in the north has been destroyed by this King Wunan of Daemyeong. Not only that, the Ras Principality, which was the enemy of the Golden Horde, was also destroyed. Those two forces were not inferior to us in the slightest. In just 2 years, they were destroyed. If we can't think of a better way, I'm afraid that this will be the lesson for us." The solemn voice caused the tent to quiet down once again. Although they were of the same branch, their ideas and thoughts were different. This made them look down on the self-proclaimed Orthodox Golden Horde from the bottom of their hearts. But this did not mean that they would underestimate the other party's strength. In Amor's words, the other party's strength was not inferior to theirs. But such a powerful Golden Horde was destroyed just like that. It was said that the old Khan Mahama was killed on the spot, and the new Khan Bora was captured alive by the 5-star army. He was beheaded on the spot in New Salai City. This kind of method made their hair stand on end when they heard it. This was an existence that was even more ferocious than them. Having such a person as an enemy really made them panic at all times. Seeing that everyone was silent, Amor spoke again. "Do you know why the Golden Horde was defeated? There were 2 reasons. One was that they underestimated the enemy, and the other was that they were not united. Facing such a powerful enemy, they did not take it seriously and were destroyed in the end. Of course, the reason why they were defeated so quickly was largely due to the desertion of the Sherkas and Allans. Since that is the case, I hope that everyone can change these 2 problems. We cannot underestimate the enemy, and we must be united. Yes, for the final victory, we must be united. I, Harson, am the first to swear to the longevity heaven that in the coming battle, I will not be selfish. I will fight for the sake of defeating the 5-star army." Harson Khan of the Ilkhanate was the first to express his attitude. He had no choice. The 5-star army was the closest to his territory. If they attacked, the first one to be attacked would be him. Therefore, he had high hopes for today's joint meeting. The result of this meeting would determine whether the Ilkhanate would continue to exist in the future. After Harson expressed his attitude, everyone looked at each other. Finally, one by one, they stood up and expressed their attitude. For their own survival, for the continuation of their race, they would give up their prejudice and personal conflicts and unite to fight against the 5-star army. Very good. Seeing that everyone had expressed their stance, revealed a knowing smile on his face. Since everyone can see the seriousness of the matter, and also expressed that we will advance and retreat together, then let's discuss. Facing the 5-star army in the west, facing the aggressive Han army, I hope that everyone will do their best. Good, I agree. My Ilkhanate is willing to provide 70,000 cavalry. It was Harson who was the first to express his support. Obviously, in order to survive, he was willing to put in a lot of effort and had a very positive attitude. Previously, when the 5-star army was fiercely attacking Ely, Harson Khan had only sent 10,000 cavalry. Moreover, he had complained about how poor they were. The general idea was that the Ilkhanate did not have many cavalry. However, now that danger was approaching, he was willing to take out 70,000 cavalry. This was enough to prove that he had been hiding his own selfish motives. Good, since it's like this, my Timur Empire is willing to provide 50,000 cavalry. A good start made Amur Khan smile. They were willing to send 50,000 cavalry. As the most powerful and the head of the Khanates, the Timur Empire had already sent 50,000 cavalry to deal with the 5-star army from the east. Now, it was sending another 50,000 cavalry to the west. From this, it could be seen that this person had a good view of the overall situation and knew how to treat everyone equally. With Harson and Amur Khan taking the lead, the other Khanates had no choice but to send soldiers to help. Among them, the Norman Empire sent 50,000, the Kazan Khanate sent 50,000, the Crimean Khanate sent 30,000, the Kazakh Khanate and Yusang sent 20,000, and the Ely Khanate sent 10,000, making a total of 300,000. In an instant, they had gathered 300,000 soldiers. Harson's face was filled with smiles. It seemed that it was not impossible for them to fight against the 5-star army. As long as they could deal a heavy blow to their opponent, they would have a chance to negotiate. At that time, he would be willing to pay tribute every year and call the other party his suzerain. Presumably, they would have a chance to escape this disaster. Yes, Harson had never thought about defeating the 5-star army. He only wanted to fight to a draw and let the other party see his strength. That was enough. After gathering 300,000 soldiers, the next step was to choose a leader. In the end, under Amur Khan's suggestion, Harson became the leader of the army. Perhaps everyone knew that the next battle would be a matter of life and death for the Ilkhanate. Anyone could compromise, but Harson wouldn't do so. They could rest assured that the army would be in the hands of such a person. After Harson obtained the command of the 300,000 cavalry, he publicly declared that he would do his utmost to fight the 5-star army to the end. He wanted to use facts to tell the other party that they, the descendants of the Mongols, were not to be trifled with. He also wanted to prove to the world that they were stronger than the Golden Horde. Chapter 1486. After the meeting, the various Khanates sent their troops to the Ilkhanate one after another. Take Harson Khan for example. After obtaining military power, the first thing he did after returning to the Khanate was not to think about where to fight the 5-star army, but to think about who to send to negotiate with the 5-star army. That's right, negotiation. Even with these 300,000 people, Harson Khan did not think that victory would definitely belong to him. Because as long as a war broke out in his Ilkhanate, no matter who won or lost, the one who would suffer in the end would only be himself. A large number of water plants would be destroyed. How would they survive in the future? It would be best if they didn't fight. The military power he wanted was to increase his confidence in negotiating with the 5-star army. In the past, he only had one Khanate, so naturally he couldn't compete with the 5-star army. But now, he had 300,000 cavalry. He believed that with such strength, the 5-star army should sit down and have a good talk with him. Therefore, before the 300,000 cavalry from the various Khanates were fully assembled, Yang Chendong had already received the news. What was even more ridiculous was that the person who passed the news was actually the special envoy sent by Harson Khan, Alating. It was him who told the enemy, the 5-star army, about his side's preparations. Peace talk? Envoy? After hearing Beta Persei's report, Yang Chendong's face was full of suspicion. No wonder he would lose his composure like this. It was because his actions had already told everyone that in front of the 5-star army, there was no such thing as coexistence. Either the whole country would surrender and be occupied by us, or the whole country would be destroyed by us and be occupied by us. Countless facts had already proven this point. Logically speaking, this Ilkhanate should have known, but he still sent an envoy, which greatly exceeded Yang Chendong's expectations. But after a moment of surprise, Yang Chendong thought that this must be because Harsan Khan still had hope in his heart for peace. Since that was the case, he might as well make good use of it. In that case, arrange for Ivan to talk with them. Tell Ivan to hold back the opponent, but we still have to attack. Once the snow melts, it will be time for us to launch our attack. Yes, young master, Beta Persei replied with a smile. He could already understand Yang Chendong's intentions. Letting Ivan, who had always hated the Mongols, negotiate with the other party, presumably that envoy called Alateng would not be able to gain the slightest advantage. Or rather, this person wanted to find someone to help him deal with young master. That was the time to kill him. Ivan. Ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, they had been behaving normally. As his father-in-law had told him before he left, he could not perform too well. Otherwise, Bugnam of Gojoseon would pay close attention to him. However, he couldn't perform too badly. Once he lost his value, the other party could abandon him at any time. As long as he kept a low profile and bided his time, when Yang Chendong was no longer around, he would be able to soar in the sky like a bird and leap in the sea like a fish. Yi Fan deeply agreed with this point. He had always behaved like this. Along the way from Eastern Europe, he had destroyed several countries and forces, big and small. He did not make any important contributions, and he had never been a hindrance. No one could find any fault with what he had done. And in the past 6 months of fighting with the army, Ivan had also learned a lot. In particular, the 5-star army's military equipment was far superior to his Ross duchies, which made him envious. Sometimes, he would think in his heart that if he had the same military equipment as the 5-star army, then when the two sides fought, it would be hard to say who would win and who would lose. Of course, he would suppress such thoughts deep in his heart. He was very clear that there was more than one pair of eyes staring at him in the dark. If he made any moves that were out of line, someone would immediately come and take his head. Ivan acted cautiously. Just like that, day after day, he slowly adapted to the life and rhythm of the 5-star army. This made him sometimes think that he was a member of the 5-star army. After the army arrived at the border of the Ilkhanate, the army stopped advancing due to the heavy snow. They began the process of conserving their energy. Sometimes, people couldn't be idle. Perhaps when they were busy, they would forget all their troubles and unhappiness. On the other hand, when they were idle, their minds would constantly wander and think about all kinds of problems. After relaxing his mind, Ivan became a little anxious. He thought about how he and Yang Chendong were only 10 years apart. When Yang Chendong grew old one day, he was afraid that he would also be very old. At that time, would he really have the energy to revive his country? To this question he didn't have a definite answer. When he thought about how he had to work for his enemy, the 5-star army, at his best age, he felt even worse. He was anxious to find an outlet to vent the unhappiness in his heart. It was at this time that the orders from above came. He was to represent the 5-star army to negotiate with the Ilkhanate's envoy and find a way to stabilize the other party. Ivan, who now had a mission, was like a completely different person. Although he had no choice but to surrender to the 5-star army, it was another way of survival that his father-in-law had planned for him. He wouldn't sincerely serve the 5-star army. However, when the opponent was the Mongols, he was very happy to do some things. For example, he had thought more than once in his heart that if it wasn't for the years of oppression from the Golden Horde, the Ross principalities would have already become independent and strong. They wouldn't have been unable to retaliate in front of the 5-star army. It could also be said that the Mongols of the Golden Horde were the main reason why the Ross Principality ended up like this. Since the Ilkhanate was built by the Mongols, they were his enemy. Even if they could not find trouble with the destroyed Golden Horde, they could still take care of the Ilkhanate. That would be a very satisfying thing. Regarding this mission, Ivan gladly accepted. Soon after, he met the envoy from the Ilkhanate, Tho. This was a fat man. Compared to the skinny face of the people from the prairie, his face was white and his body was fat. It could be seen that this person's standard of living was very good. Usually, people like this were the most afraid of death and the most afraid of losing everything. This was the first time Ivan met him, and this was the definition he had given him. Alting was completely unaware. He squinted his small eyes and looked at Ivan. He didn't say anything, but he gave off a feeling of humility. This wasn't surprising. This time, he was here to ask for peace. How could he be arrogant? Furthermore, the propaganda in the Ilkhanate described the 5-star army as having 3 heads and 6 arms, and that they would eat people without spitting out the bones. This caused Alting's heart to beat faster as soon as he entered the camp. He was really afraid that if he accidentally offended someone, he would be killed here. Once upon a time, the people of the Central Plains had compared the prairie people to unbearably rough existences and unreasonable people. Now, it was finally their turn to look at the Han people in this way. How could it not be that the strength of the Han people had shocked some people to their souls? Ivan unhurriedly gestured to Alting, who had entered the tent, to sit down. The other party was very careful. He smiled apologetically and thanked Ivan repeatedly before sitting down. Even so, his butt was only half on the chair. From the looks of it, he was ready to stand up at any time. His posture was no different from a subordinate seeing the fruit of upper eternity. Ivan, who saw all of this, only smiled. He didn't want to expose the other party's intentions, nor did he want to say anything to scare the other party. Because he knew that compared to raising his voice, the content of his words could really scare the other party. You are the one the Ilkhanate sent to surrender, right? No, I am here to negotiate. When he heard the word, surrender, Alting's face flushed red, and at the same time he looked nervous. Negotiate? Ivan purposely frowned, then slowly raised his head and said, Did we say that we want to negotiate? Of course not. But we have 300,000 cavalrymen. Before Alting could finish, Ivan's expression changed. What? Are you trying to scare the 5-star army? Or do you think you can defeat us with 300,000 cavalrymen? Are you here to flaunt your strength? Not at all. Please don't be angry. We are here to negotiate sincerely. Alting was so scared that he stood up and tried to explain himself. However, Ivan already had an impatient look on his face. After a humph, he stood up and left. Alting was left standing alone in the tent. He didn't know what to do. Why did he leave just like that? What should he do? After a long time, another person entered the tent and said to him, General Ivan is very displeased with your attitude, and he is also very angry. Regarding the negotiation, let's talk about it another day. Envoy, please go back to the tent and rest. Oh, also, don't walk around casually in the tent. Otherwise, if you anger someone you shouldn't, you can lose your head at any time. Thank you for the reminder. Hearing this, a layer of cold sweat appeared on Alting's forehead again, and he hurriedly nodded in response. The first meeting ended on bad terms. This was also Ivan's intention. Wasn't it just stalling for time? Of course, he knew what to do. As long as Alting didn't return to the Ilkhanate, it would create a misconception that there was still a chance to negotiate. This way, the other side might relax their defense, which would give the 5-star army a chance to win. Just as Ivan expected, Alting didn't return immediately. He only sent a message saying that the negotiator of the 5-star army had a bad temper and that he still needed to communicate with them. However, it wasn't hopeless, so he asked them to wait for a while. Chapter 1487. When the message was sent back, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't want to fight, especially on his own territory. This was tantamount to destroying his strength, so even if there was a chance for peace talks, he wouldn't miss it. When he heard that there was hope for peace talks, Harsan Khan was overjoyed. He didn't send people to ask why the reinforcements sent by the other Khans hadn't arrived yet. In his opinion, it would be best if there was no war. If the reinforcements didn't arrive, he could save a lot of military provisions. 3 days later, Alting felt that Ivan's anger should have subsided a little, so he asked the 5-star army soldiers guarding outside his tent to pass on a message. He wanted to see General Ivan and continue the negotiations. In the afternoon, in the same big tent, Alting saw Ivan, who reeked of alcohol. When he saw the other party's appearance, Alting was relieved. He wasn't stupid, he was most worried that the other party would use him to lower the vigilance of the Ilkhanate and prepare for war. But now that he saw Ivan's body reeking of alcohol, he thought that the other party wasn't preparing for war, but enjoying it. It seems that they don't like war. That being the case, he was confident that the peace talks would succeed. Sure enough, this time, Ivan was much easier to talk to than the last time. He didn't object to the peace talks proposed by Alting. Instead, he really listened to the other party's various opinions. For example, in the future, King Munan of Daemyong will be honored as the king, annual tribute, as well as how much money will be sent. In the end, when it was time for Ivan to express his opinion, he still said with a face full of alcohol, "Good, good, 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 ha." In the end, Ivan's subordinates left with the excuse that the general drank too much and needed to sleep, but the matter will be reported to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Alateng, who was left behind, naturally had a look of joy on his face. After he returned to his tent, he quickly wrote a secret letter to Harsan Khan. The general idea was that his side was progressing well, and he hoped that Harsan Khan wouldn't do anything that would provoke the 5-star army. What Ailton didn't know was that Ivan didn't drink alcohol. He just spilled the liquor on his clothes to create this illusion. As for himself, after returning to his own tent, he continued to prepare for the upcoming battle. Not only that, the commander of the 5-star Army's reconnaissance division, Su Yunxing, had already arranged for people to start investigating the terrain of the Ilkhanate, as well as the distribution of troops. As the saying goes, "Know thyself and know thy enemy, and thou shalt be victorious in every battle." When he faced the 300,000 Mongolian cavaliers, Yang Chendong was determined to inflict pain on them and destroy their main force. This was because he was really afraid that the fangs of the 5-star army would scare some people. Once these people fought on their own, it would be much more difficult to eliminate them. This was not the result that Yang Chendong wanted to see. For example, General Maxim of the Novgorod city-state under the Rasi Principality, and Shamask, the leader of the Sherkas people who originally belonged to the Golden Horde, had escaped to who knows where. According to the information sent by the intelligence department, the two of them had long lost their former strength and had become stray dogs. It was likely that they no longer had any decent troops by their side. However, Yang Chendong, who had always believed in cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, would do what he did today and would never leave it until tomorrow, was still somewhat irritating. It was better to avoid trouble if possible. This time, he wanted to eliminate as many of the enemy forces as possible and not leave any future troubles. This required the scouts in the early stages to grasp the situation of the battlefield and do their best to analyze the enemy's situation clearly and thoroughly. This was to ensure that they didn't take action, but if they did, it would be a heavy blow. The snow is about to melt. Tell Commander Su Yunsheng to hurry up and understand the enemy's situation. They don't have much time left. Yang Chendong instructed Beta Persei and put him in charge of monitoring this matter. Time passed day by day, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 3rd month of spring. Although spring came later in the Ilkhanate, the day of the attack was getting closer and closer. At this time, the negotiations between Ivan and Alting had entered a substantial stage. The so-called substantial stage involved the issue of compensation. In other words, what kind of price would the Ilkhanate have to pay to satisfy the 5-star army and make them retreat without fighting? Although the Ilkhanate had never offended the 5-star army and this was a completely unexpected disaster, the bigger the fist, the harder the argument. Since their strength was inferior, they had to hold back even if they had any ideas. Not only did they have to hold back, but Alting also had to pretend to be very happy and try his best to satisfy the various conditions proposed by Ivan. Only in this way could they stop the war and complete this difficult task. The two of them sat in a military tent. First, Alting repeated the price that the Ilkhanate was willing to pay. For example, how much gold and silver, how many horses and sheep, and even a certain number of slaves they were willing to hand over to the 5-star army in order to avoid this war. This was the rule between the defeated Ilkhanates. Once one side lost, they would send these things to the winner, in order to ensure that they could barely survive. Ivan sat on the chair expressionlessly, quietly listening to Alteng's narration without any expression on his face. He didn't look happy, nor did he look disappointed. It was this expression that made Alteng a little overwhelmed. He didn't know if the other side was satisfied with what he said, so he always looked at Ivan with an inquiring look. How could he know that at this time, Ivan was thinking about the military order that he had just received in the morning? The higher-ups wanted the troops to prepare for war, and in 3 to 5 days, they would launch a fierce attack. Because of Ivan's recent performance, his original 1,000 soldiers were promoted to 2,000, and he had an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers under his command. Logically speaking, having an army under his command was a good thing, but Ivan wasn't like others. He was very clear that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to gain Yang Chendong's complete trust. Since that was the case, why would he be given an additional 1,000 soldiers? Moreover, they were Russian soldiers? He was the young master of the Ross Duchy. Logically speaking, all Russians were his subordinates, his own people. In order to prevent him from betraying, even if he was to increase the number of soldiers, it should be the Mongolian army and not the Russian army. What was Yang Chendong trying to do? Was he testing him? Or was it because his performance had won the other party's trust, and he was really going to give him power? After thinking about it, Ivan ruled out the second possibility. In other words, it was impossible to have absolute trust. Then the only thing left was to test him. Even though he knew that it was a test, Ivan still had more soldiers under his command, especially after gaining an additional 1,000 Russian soldiers. He had more ideas in his mind. For example, could he use the upcoming war with the Ilkhanate to create an opportunity for himself to escape? Just like Marguzim, once he escaped, the 5-star army would be like looking for a needle in a haystack if they wanted to catch him. In this way, as long as he avoided the other party's initial search, he could find a safe place to develop again. Once he grew stronger, it would be time for him to return to Eastern Europe and take back everything he had lost. Of course, it was still unknown whether Magus Maximus would be able to survive under the suppression of other forces. However, the conceited Ivan believed that with his ability and identity, he would have no problem surviving and growing stronger. It was precisely because there were too many thoughts in his mind that he couldn't calm down. As for Alaton's words, he couldn't listen. General Ivan, are you listening? After seeing Ivan's obviously distracted expression, Elton didn't continue talking and changed to calling him softly. Oh, I'm listening, please continue. After Ivan was woken up, he showed an apologetic expression and said, he wanted to calm down because his intuition told him that now wasn't the time to fight back. Yang Chendong must be paying attention to him. But there was another voice in his mind that kept calling him. If he didn't take this opportunity to fight back, he didn't know when the next opportunity would come. If that was the case, could he really keep waiting? Would his character and self-esteem allow him to do that? The strength of the Ilkhanate was average, and it wasn't a good partner to cooperate with. But he didn't expect the other party to really defeat the 5-star army. As long as the Ilkhanate's main force was delayed, it should be possible to create an opportunity for him to escape. Elton said that in order to deal with the 5-star army, the Ilkhanate borrowed 300,000 cavalries from the other khanates. 300,000 cavalries, they should be able to create some trouble for the 5-star army and make them unable to take care of him. At that time, his opportunity might come. Ivan was very clear about his own strength. He didn't want to leave in a daze. What he wanted was to kill Yang Chendong. Only in this way could the 5-star army be in chaos and he could return to Eastern Europe to reorganize. Compared to Maxim, who had disappeared without a trace after escaping and was now hiding in some unknown mountain, what he wanted to do was to retake Moscow and lead the Rossi people to stand up again. And he firmly believed that as long as there was no Yang Chendong in front of him, he might be able to do this. When he looked at Alden, who was still speaking with a fawning expression on his face, he couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty in his heart. Is such a person suitable to be my ally? Forget it, he seemed to have no other choice. In the situation where he didn't know when the next opportunity would be, he could only give it a try. Ivan suddenly got up and walked to the door of the tent. He saw that the person guarding the door was the former palace guard, and he was absolutely trustworthy. When he saw that there was nothing abnormal outside, he coughed and turned to Ailton. "You're going to be in big trouble, do you know that?" Ailton asked as if he didn't understand. But at this moment his face had already turned pale, and he had an extremely terrified look on his face. He had revealed his cowardly side without a doubt. Chapter 1488. In the main tent, Dao Xiao, the captain of the 2nd Black Cavalry, who was responsible for monitoring Ivan's tent, was reporting the situation. "It looks like everything is normal, there is no problem. Okay, you can go." Listening to Dao Xiao's words for a long time, Yang Chendong waved his hand. Dao Xiao retreated, leaving only Beta Persei in the tent. Seeing Yang Chendong's eyebrows seem to be frowning together, he asked puzzledly, "Young master, didn't Captain Dao say that everything is normal? What are you worried about?" "Oh, normal is abnormal." Yang Chendong shook his head. He has an intuition that in the face of such a good opportunity, Ivan will do something. Because he firmly believes that the two of them are the same in their bones, they are the kind of people who are unwilling to live under someone else's roof, and they have strong national characteristics. The more so, the more impossible it is for such a person to truly surrender to another person. Now that there is no action, it doesn't mean that his temperament has changed, it's just that there is no suitable opportunity. In order to make the other party reveal their true colors, he deliberately strengthened the other party's military power in order to accelerate the other party's intention to rise. He doesn't believe that Ivan will continue to wait under the conditions of internal and external troubles. He will definitely do it, Yang Chendong firmly believes. "Are the ninjas of Japan in place?" Yang Chendong suddenly got up and asked as if he thought of something. "Young master, Chuishiko has arrived. There are 50 ninjas with him." Beta Persei had already received the report, but because there were only 51 people, he didn't report this small matter. "Very good, tell Chuishiko to come down and see me. Remember, see me secretly, no one except the Black Cavalry should know about this," Yang Chendong ordered. Just as Yang Chendong arranged everything in the main tent, the messenger of Ilkhanate, Alateng, was sitting in his tent with a pale face. If one took a closer look, they would notice that his body was trembling. Yes, Alerting was very scared at this moment. When he suddenly found that his efforts these days not only did not help the Ilkhanate, but also helped the tyrant, he hated himself to death. Why did he trust the 5-star army so much? They had actually made preparations to attack the Khanate behind his back. It was a pity that he was still kept in the dark and was still thinking of using peaceful means to solve the problem. If it wasn't for what Ivan had said to him today and even told him about the military plans of the 5-star army, he would probably still be full of longing for the future. The Han people's way of saying one thing and doing another made Alting completely lose hope in the peace talks. What he needed to do now was to send the general military plan of the 5-star army back to the Khanate. This was the most important thing. However, when he thought of the fully armed 5-star army soldiers outside the tent, how could he do that? General Ivan had already said that there was nothing he could do about this matter and that he needed to find a way himself. Solution? Where did the solution come from? When he thought of the failure of the peace talks, his value as an emissary would be gone, and he might even die here. His whole body was covered in cold sweat. He really didn't want to die. It was better to live than to die. When he thought of living, Alteng's gaze fell on his bag. There was a kind of herb inside. After eating it, people would foam at the mouth and become unconscious. It was like being poisoned. The process was no different from peeling off a layer of skin. The advantage was that he could recover after some treatment. Although he would have to suffer a lot, it was better than dying. This was originally the preparation he made before. If he couldn't go against the situation, he might be able to escape with this method. After all, the 5-star army didn't want an emissary to die in their camp. It wouldn't be good if word got out. People who were afraid of death were always strange. They would always think of all kinds of solutions. He originally thought that this time the peace talks would go smoothly and he wouldn't need to use this thing, but now it seems that he still had to take this step. Let's hope it can fool the 5-star army. Alting sighed in his heart. He came to the bag, took out the herb disguised as a tea cake, got a cup of water, and swallowed it. About half an hour later, Yang Chendong was in the tent reading the telegram sent by Qian City. It said that the first batch of engines was finally replicated. With the help of a large number of books, and most importantly, with the help of realistic reference materials, the engine problem of the motorcycle was finally solved. Once there were no problems with the trial production, Yang Chendong would have the first batch of motorcycles. It would accelerate the transportation ability on land and increase the mobility of the 5-star army by more than one level. Just as he was sighing about the various benefits this initiative would bring, Deputy Captain Bedao Jiang, who was in charge of tonight's shift, walked in. Sixth Young Master, General Ivan suddenly sent a message saying that the emissary of the Ilkhanate is in critical condition. What should we do? His life is in danger? This sudden news interrupted Yang Chendong's train of thought. He couldn't help but raise his head and ask. Yes, that's what the report said. I've already arranged for the doctor to check on him. There should be a result soon. Badao Jiang nodded and replied. Just as they were talking, there was another report from outside the door. Then, the military doctor came in to report that the emissary named Alton was indeed poisoned. His condition was very bad, and he could die at any time. Sixth Young Master, the emissary is dying, but the military doctor said that he shouldn't die so quickly. After all, Alting is quite fat, so he should be able to last for a day or two. Should we send him away? Badao Jiang carefully suggested. Is this what you mean? Yang Chendong asked with interest after listening. No, this is what General Ivan said in his report. He thinks that since he's an emissary, he represents the face of the Ilkhanate. If such an important person dies in our camp, there will be a lot of problems. Since that's the case, it's best to send him away while he's still alive. We can ask the Ilkhanate to send another emissary here. Thinking of what Ivan said in his report, Badao Jiang said almost exactly the same thing. Yang Chendong heard that this was Ivan's idea, and a smile appeared on his face. Well, since that's the case, let's do as General Ivan said. After all, the emissary's problem has always been this person's responsibility, right? Hearing that Yang Chendong agreed, Badao Jiang nodded and turned around to pass on the order. Leaving Yang Chendong alone in the command tent, he closed the contents of the telegram and unconsciously hummed a tune that no one had heard before. Badao Jiang left the command tent and saw Ivan waiting anxiously 100 meters away. General Ivan, the sixth young master said that you've always been responsible for the emissary's problem. Since Alting is dying, immediately send him away and ask them to send another emissary. By the way, the emissary's food needs to be carefully checked in the future to prevent this from happening again. The last sentence was added by Badao Jiang himself. He felt that it was necessary to say it. And because of this sentence, the suspicion in Ivan's heart was dispelled. He even suspected that Yang Chendong had seen through his trick. But when he heard this sentence, his face relaxed a lot. Okay, I'll be careful in the future. Then I'll go arrange it. Ivan turned around and left, lamenting Altang's decisiveness in his heart. Originally, he was curious about how Alting would leave the 5-star army's camp. He didn't expect Alting to go all out and use such an extreme method. Although Ivan didn't know how Alting did it. But his intuition told him that Alting would be fine. At most, he would suffer a little. This was all because Alting was afraid of death, and people who were afraid of death would always think of many ways to survive. Ivan watched as the Ilkhanate's emissary group left. He looked at Alting, who was carried on a stretcher and didn't say a word from the beginning to the end, only foaming at the mouth from time to time. He was really worried. He was afraid that the medicine would be too strong and that Alting wouldn't be able to last until he saw Ilkhanate. But at this point, there was no use in hesitating. He had already told Alting about the 5-star army's attack plan, and it wouldn't be long before Ilkhanate knew about it. That would be equivalent to betraying the 5-star army. In that case, there was no turning back. I hope everything goes well. He sighed. At this moment, Ivan looked in the direction of the central camp. He knew that if the plan went well, his ultimate goal would be there. At that time, with his 500 palace guards, he might have a chance of winning. If he could really kill Yang Chendong, his plan would be a success. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since Alting left. In these 3 days, they didn't see any emissaries from Ilkhanate. Not only that, just a moment ago, Commander Su Yunsheng found out that a large number of cavalry had been mobilized in Ilkhanate's territory. From the looks of it, they were about to go to war. The sudden change was heard by some generals, and they couldn't understand it. Could it be that some information was leaked? Or did Ilkhanate have no intention of negotiating at all? They were just like him, using the peace talks to buy time, but were actually secretly preparing? In the central camp, Yang Chendong also received the battle report from the scout division. He raised his eyebrows, and his eyes revealed a trace of undetectable killing intent. Summon all generals above division level, come in for a meeting. In less than half an hour, all the officers above division level had arrived in the central camp. There were also a few people who were stationed far away, so they would catch up in a short time. But Yang Chendong didn't need to wait for them. Speed was the most important thing in war. Since the other side was already prepared, if he didn't act early, he would lose the initiative. Chapter 1489. Seeing that most of the people had arrived, Yang Chendong stood up from his seat. Following his action, everyone immediately fell silent. Everyone looked at Yang Chendong expectantly, waiting for his decision. Everyone, this king originally wanted to solve the problem of the Ilkhanate peacefully. However, there are some people who don't believe in heresy. They don't believe that our 5-star army is invincible. They still want to fight. Since this is the case, we should use our actions to tell some people that those who provoke our 5-star army will definitely die. Is everyone confident? The high-ranking officers all shouted in unison. Their voices were so loud that it seemed like they wanted to flip the roof of the tent over. Very good. Since that is the case, I will now announce the battle order. Considering that the Ilkhanate is already prepared, this time, we will change the attack plan appropriately. The initial battle plan will remain unchanged, but midway through, it will be. As Yang Chendong spoke, the battle plan changed accordingly. In the later stages, it was completely different from the original plan. It could even be described as a facade. Although he wasn't 100% sure that Ivan had already told Alton about the army's battle plan, he still made some changes for the sake of safety. It had to be said that this was the original battle plan in his heart. The previous battle plan was only used to test the waters. Hearing this plan, many of the officers revealed a shocked expression. They had a feeling that this plan was simply a copy of the first battle plan. It was to make up for the shortcomings of the first battle plan. It could also be said that it was a trap. It was a plan that was based on the first battle plan's defense. In the end, if someone knew about their previous battle plan and used it as a defense, then the second battle plan would beat them so badly that even their parents would not be able to recognize them. Yang Chendong's words were orders. His authority had already reached a level that no one dared to question. Thus, even though some of the officers had doubts in their hearts, no one raised them. Instead, they remembered their duty and mission. Then, they walked out of the tent and went to the army to arrange the battle. The tent that was originally packed with people quickly became spacious and empty. Yang Chendong's gaze also swept to Beta Persei. Young master, Beta Persei seemed to have been waiting for this scene to happen. When he saw Yang Chendong's gaze sweep over him, he had a flattering smile on his face and even straightened his body. Needless to say, when Beta Persei showed this expression, it was equivalent to asking for battle. Speaking of which, Yang Heir was a war maniac. What he should do the most was to lead an army into battle and demonstrate the value and significance of his existence by swinging his saber and chopping. It was not appropriate to let such a person stay by Yang Chendong's side. However, Yang Chendong still did so. It was all because by his side, he would come into contact with many confidential matters. Once these things were spread out, the consequences would not be small. They would be very serious. Therefore, it was necessary to use an absolutely loyal person to reassure him. Beta Persei was such a loyal person. Facts also proved that he knew a lot of those very confidential things, but did he not spread any of them? In order to compensate Beta Persei, Yang Chendong would also let him perform on the battlefield if there was a suitable opportunity. Now was the right time. Looking at the eager Beta Persei, Yang Chendong smiled and said, Well, I know what you're thinking. How about this? I'll allow you to lead the black cavalry. Well, take 1,800 people with you. You only need to leave 200 people behind for Ba Daojiang. Hearing that he could lead the black cavalry to the battlefield, Beta Persei was extremely excited. But when he heard that he had to take away so many people at once and only leave 200 people behind, Beta Persei was still a little worried. Young master, just leave? What? Don't you believe in the young master's strength? Well, I'll let you go, so just go. You know, this time the other party has 300,000 cavalry. If we want to win, we need to break through the other party's camp at the first opportunity and not give them the slightest chance to resist. So we have to go all out. I also hope that the black cavalry can be like an invincible sharp knife, piercing straight into the enemy's heart. Can this mission be completed? Please rest assured, young master, I promise to complete the mission. Beta Persei was so excited that he stood at attention on the spot. Well, go and get ready. Remember, the sharp knife can't be unsheathed at will. Once it's unsheathed, it must see blood. Naturally, Yang Chendong would not treat the black cavalry dragon guards as ordinary cavalry. What he wanted was to see a miracle. This required them to learn to grasp the opportunity and not appear at the beginning of the battle and reveal their trump cards. After Beta Persei carefully pondered over this sentence, he nodded and said, "Please rest assured, Sixth Master, this little one will remember." Beta Persei left the tent and Ba Daojiang quickly walked in. "Sixth young master, everything has been arranged. But only 200 people are left. Second brother has also been sent out. Isn't it too dangerous?" Yang Chendong knew what Ba Daojiang was worried about, so he shook his head and said, "If we don't do this, some people won't be moved. Besides, we do need more sharp knives on the battlefield. The Ilkhanate is only our first opponent. There will be more enemies in the future. If we lose too many people in this battle, it won't be good for our next operations." At this moment, the 400,000 soldiers that Yang Chendong had brought with him looked mighty and powerful. But he knew better than anyone that this strength was only on the surface. At this time, they were facing the most important problem, which was that they had no backup. With their current location, no matter where they were too far away. Whether it was military supplies or soldiers, they couldn't replenish them immediately. Once they suffered a heavy blow, they could only retreat and return to Eastern Europe to replenish their supplies. Or they could charge forward and kill their way out to meet up with the new army and the new 5 armies in the Ilkhanate region. But it would be very difficult to break through the layers of obstacles. Since the situation was like this, it required Yang Chendong to take every step to inflict the greatest amount of damage to the enemy with the smallest price. And sending out as many troops as possible would increase their chances of winning. As for the danger they might encounter, it was nothing if they were prepared. "Ba Daojiang, have you obtained the firearms from the 2nd Division of Lung Feng? They are all here. The appropriate arrangements have been made." Ba Daojiang nodded heavily, his eyes filled with excitement. With these firearms, he wouldn't be afraid no matter how many enemies came. Ivan. He was only a commander of 2,000 people, and he wasn't qualified to participate in the military meeting that Yang Chendong was hosting. As such, he didn't know about the changes in the battle plan. Otherwise, with his intelligence, he would have given up all the prepared actions after knowing all of this. That way, Yang Chendong wouldn't have the chance to deal with him. As Ivan's subordinate, Qi Wen, one of the generals of the Golden Horde, was the current commander of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. The Meng Army is divided into 5 divisions, each of which has 40,000 people. The 1st Division commander is Wu Shugu, the 2nd Division commander is He, the 3rd Division commander is Qi Wen, the 4th Division commander is Baru, and the 5th Division commander is Wu Tuo. The Forerunner Division has 100,000 people and is split into 2 divisions. The 1st Division is a Huli, and the 2nd Division is Nick Olaf. The 1st Division has 50,000 people. In his tent, Ivan and a dozen other commanders of 2,000 people gathered and listened to the battle plan that General Qi Wen had arranged for them. Due to Yang Chendong's warning, no one knew if the Ilkhanate had bribed the generals to know about the battle plan in advance. Therefore, Qi Wen didn't mention anything about the change in the battle plan. He only said one sentence at the end of the meeting. On the battlefield, changes can happen at any time. It is very likely that we will have to make some changes according to these changes. When the time comes, everyone just needs to wait for orders. This was something that should be done. If they followed the designated route, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any unknown problems. Therefore, when the battle plan was changed, everyone who had led troops for many years was already used to it. Even Ivan didn't have any other thoughts after hearing this. He only knew that the 5-star army's battle plan didn't change, and that was enough. As long as the Ilkhanate was prepared, they would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, and then his chance would come. Ivan followed the others out of the tent of Chi Wen, the general of 30,000 men. Not far away, his captain Karela was waiting for him. The former deputy captain of his father-in-law's guards was one of the few people that Ivan could trust now. Gongzi, we have already inquired. In order to end this battle quickly, the Black Cavalry has also been dispatched. Someone saw Beta Persei leave the camp with 1,800 cavalrymen. At this moment, there are only 200 men left in the main tent to guard. Karela said in an excited but not loud voice as he walked beside Ivan. After he finished speaking, Karela still asked with a little worry, "Young master, you said this is a heaven-sent opportunity? Is it a trap waiting for us to jump in?" Karela was indeed worthy of being the deputy captain of the blind Grand Duke's guards. He was full of brains. Just from his words, it could be proved that he had indeed thought about the current situation. Ivan walked step by step towards his own camp, a pensive expression on his face. This battle was naturally important for the 5-star army. If they could defeat the Ilkhanate and the 300,000 cavalrymen in one fell swoop, their morale was bound to soar. It would also let the name of the 5-star army spread to some of the nearby khanates. This would undoubtedly play a strong deterrent role. In this way, the limelight would be unparalleled for a while, and it was not impossible for some people to surrender to the 5-star army. Chapter 1490. In order to achieve this goal, as well as to increase their chances of winning, Yang Chendong had sent out the most elite Black Knights, the Dragon Guards. It seemed that everything was normal, but for some reason, Ivan always had a feeling that everything was going too smoothly. Alateng's departure, the military operation plan was leaked, and even now, most of the guards around him were withdrawn. Yang Chendong seemed to be telling him, "Do you want to harm me? Do you want to make a move? Then come quickly, there won't be such a shop after this village." Since things were going too smoothly, Ivan felt a little unconfident. He had thought about it carefully. It seemed that everything that happened was so natural, and it seemed that it was because of his own efforts that this ending appeared. Wasn't this what he wanted? Then what was there to hesitate about? The most taboo thing for those who wanted to achieve great things was to be decisive. If it was very likely that victory would be brushed aside. So after thinking about it, Ivan decided to give it a try, because he was also worried about whether there would be a chance after this time. Especially once the 5-star army on the east and west sides converged, he was afraid that at that time, he, as an external general, would not have a chance to get close to Yang Chendong. At that time, how could he talk about revenge? It won't be a trap. Our plan is very thorough. Like this, don't do anything, act as usual, we just need to make a move when it's the most appropriate time. Ivan said carefully. He couldn't guarantee that no one among the 500 palace guards had secretly become Yang Chendong's spies. So except for these few people he trusted, before the matter was done, he wouldn't reveal a trace of information. Hearing Ivan's answer, Korea was relieved. Although their master was very young, he was an existence that even the Grand Duke of Blindness often praised. The 5-star army's attack began. Before the Ilkhanate was fully prepared, the first echelon of Air Force hot air balloons rose into the air and flew straight to the target. Not only could they play the role of Air Force reconnaissance, but they could also play the role of air bombers when they encountered a dense group of enemies. With the help of the engines, the hot air balloons moved faster and faster. Soon, hundreds of hot air balloons filled the entire sky above the battlefield. At this time, Harsan Han of the Ilkhanate was also mobilizing his army. Relying on the information brought back by Alton, He began to launch a counterattack against the Five-Star Army. Under Ha Linhan's command, 80,000 cavalrymen were sent to various locations on the battlefield. The pale-faced Alateng also came to the central tent. When he saw that the Great Khan had only sent out 80,000 cavalry, he asked with a puzzled look, "The cavalry of the other countries haven't arrived yet. How long has it been?" "No. They all arrived 3 days ago." Harsan Khan smiled proudly. This time, in order to support the Ilkhanate, the reinforcements sent by the other Ilkhanates arrived on time. With 300,000 cavalrymen in his hand, he had a great feeling that no one in the world could compete with him. Listening to Harsan Khan's proud answer, this time it was Alateng's turn to have a puzzled look. If that's the case, why didn't the Great Khan send out the army to block the Five-Star Army's attack direction and seize the initiative? "Oh, no hurry, let's wait and see first," Harsan Khan said slowly. Obviously, he didn't completely believe the information that Alateng exchanged with his life, and he also didn't believe the young man who was supposed to be the heir of the Ross Principality. After hearing this, Alateng's face turned red. However, he didn't know what to say. After all, he couldn't guarantee that Ivan was telling the truth. If there were any discrepancies, it would involve the lives of 300,000 cavalrymen. Even if he killed himself, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. As expected, the commander of the alliance, Great Khan Harsan Khan, didn't completely believe the information that Ivan said. When the news was sent back, Yang Chendong let out a sigh of relief. This gave him more time to adjust his strategy. When Harsan Khan found out that Ivan's information wasn't wrong, he would definitely send out all his troops. This way, the Five-Star Army's revised attack plan could be put to use. At that time, it would be time to deal a heavy blow to the enemy and obtain victory. At this moment, Yang Chendong could almost see the scene of victory. But what he didn't know was that danger was surrounding him. 20 miles to the left of the Five-Star Legion Corps, a force of 30,000 Mongol cavalry was hiding in a dense forest. Just from the fact that these cavalrymen were holding grass in their hands, their horses were wrapped in their hooves, and the fact that 30,000 people were piled up together without making a single sound, one could tell that this was an extremely elite cavalry force. If Yang Chendong was here, he would be able to recognize at a glance that the leader of this group of generals was the one who had disappeared for a long time, the one who once had an illustrious reputation on the grassland, Master Tolos. This was a group of elite Mongolian cavalrymen led by Yeshen. Ever since they were defeated and forced to leave, Yeshen brought 60,000 cavalrymen and escaped from the Five-Star Army's line of sight. In order to hide their tracks, they were very careful along the way. They passed through dense forests and walked through deserts. They would go wherever there were fewer people. Furthermore, in order to make the Five-Star Army forget about them, they would hide wherever there was human habitation. Sometimes, in order to avoid people, they would take a detour of tens or even hundreds of li to completely hide their tracks. It had to be said that Yeshen's way of doing things really made the Yangtze Intelligence Department lose track of them. As a result, they settled down in a deserted area in the desert and stayed there for 5 years. Although the place they chose was remote, there were water plants and it was a good place to graze. With such a place to rest, Yeshen's tribe began to slowly heal their wounds. If nothing unexpected happened, perhaps they would become strong again in 20 years. At that time, it would be time for them to take revenge on the Five-Star Army. Of course, the sky was full of unforeseen winds and clouds, and man's fate was uncertain. One day, Yeshen drank a lot of wine in his tent and coughed up blood. After the wizard's examination, he was told that his body was sick and that he only had a year to live at most. These words were like a bolt from the blue, causing Yeshen's face to turn pale. After that, he locked himself in his tent for 3 days. In these 3 days, he didn't see a single person. Apart from eating and drinking, he didn't talk to anyone. On the 4th day, he walked out of his tent and made a decision. He wanted to find Yang Chendong and take revenge. He wanted to use the last year of his life to complete his life's greatest goal. Just like this, apart from leaving behind a few youths to General Buru to protect their homeland and reproduce, he chose the most elite 30,000 people. With Bo Muir, one of the 4 great generals, as his deputy, they walked out of the desert and embarked on the journey to find Yang Chendong. Since last autumn, they had walked out of the desert and searched for Yang Chendong's whereabouts. As the days passed, Yes Hen had his own worries. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find Yang Chendong in his last days. If that happened, he wouldn't have any hope of revenge. Even if he died, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Perhaps the heavens didn't disappoint those who were willing. Finally, the cavalry scouts sent back news that Yang Chendong had appeared. He appeared in the region west of the Ilkhanate. When he heard this news, Yeshen's eyes couldn't help but shed tears. That was a sign of his excitement. After that, he led the 30,000 cavalrymen to the back of the 5-star Army's main camp. The news from the cavalry scouts had once made Yes Hen feel discouraged. When he heard that Yang Chendong had brought 400,000 cavalry, he thought that he had no hope of revenge. After all, 30,000 against 400,000, and they were the elites of the 5-star army, he had no chance of victory. However, yesterday, he suddenly received news that the 5-star army had set out, splitting into more than 10 groups to kill their way towards the Ilkhanate. Yes Hen once again knelt on the ground. He wanted to thank the heavens for giving him this opportunity for revenge. In particular, when he found out that his target Yang Chendong's commander flag was still in the central camp and hadn't moved. He didn't follow his subordinates to the front lines. He knew that his chance had come. "Leader, should we send someone to scout? It would be best if we can confirm that Yang Chendong is indeed in the central camp before we make our move. That way it would be safer." Deputy General Bo Mu-er gave his opinion in an experienced manner. "We don't have time." Yes Hen shook his head and rejected this suggestion. He didn't know when the 5-star army would return after setting out. What if they didn't wait for the right opportunity and the other party's main force returned? If that was the case, wouldn't he be wasting this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Yes Hen didn't want to regret anymore. He decided to give it a try even if it didn't work. Even if they all died here, at least he had worked hard and fought for his goal. Let everyone have a good rest. Before dawn, the army will start moving and raise our Khan flag. This time, I want Yang Chendong to die with a clear understanding. Ha! Yes Hen laughed loudly as he made the final decision of his life. At this time, Yang Chendong didn't know that he had been targeted. Both the scouts and the hot air balloons in the sky had done their scouting and had come to the same conclusion. The 300,000 cavalrymen that the Ilkhanate had fought so hard for were all in a defensive position. No one took the initiative to attack, and no one dared to take the initiative to attack. Therefore, the rear of the army was arranged very well. This time, in order to use the fastest and most ruthless method to deal a heavy blow to the enemy, Yang Chendong had sent out all of his 400,000 troops. The only ones left behind were some medical personnel and the 200 black cavalry soldiers. Chapter 1491. Yang Chendong even purposely separated his provisions camp because there were tens of thousands of cavalrymen in charge of guarding the provisions. Once these people were by his side, he had to worry about whether Ivan, who had designs on him, would dare to make a move. It could also be said that Yang Chendong was willing to risk his life in order to convince Ivan of his death and also to give an explanation to the blind duke and the nobles and generals of the Ras Duchy who surrendered to him. "If he doesn't come, then I will only look down on his courage." After letting out a cold snort, Yang Chendong sat in the tent and slowly flipped through an ancient book. It was as if he didn't know that danger would come at any time. Ba Daojiang, who was waiting at the side, was a little nervous, but after seeing Yang Chendong's performance, he calmed down a lot. He was infected by Yang Chendong's performance. Thinking of this, there were 200 black cavalry armed to the teeth with muskets. Even if Ivan came, what was there to be afraid of? He was just coming to die. Would Ivan really come? The answer was yes. The central camp was so empty. When the news reached Ivan's ears, he had a feeling that Yang Chendong had already seen through his thoughts and set up this formation to wait for him to appear. But even so, knowing that it was a trap, Ivan decided to jump into it. On this point, he and Yes Hen had the same idea. If he didn't make a move this time, it would be difficult to wait for such a suitable opportunity. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. At this time, Ivan was determined to fight to the death. After hearing that there were only 200 black cavalry and nearly 1,000 medics in the camp, there were no other soldiers. He who was advancing according to Commander Chiwen's orders suddenly stopped. Along with him were the 500 former palace guards. It was time to make things clear to these people. When Ivan said that he was going to return to the Middle Corps camp and take Yang Chendong's head, Zhang Ruochen was shocked. The faces of some of the 500 palace guards who were unaware of what had happened changed drastically. It was true that they used to be guards of the palace and had received the favor of the Grand Duke of Blindness. Logically speaking, his former master was the monarch. If the monarch wanted the subject to die, the subject had no choice but to die. However, ever since they surrendered to the 5-star army, the treatment they received was no worse than the former palace guards. Most importantly, they saw too many of their clansmen who had been promoted because of their military exploits. Originally, when the 5-star army said that everyone was equal when it came to military merits, some people didn't believe it. However, reality slapped them in the face. Because of this, everyone's enthusiasm was aroused and they saw hope in life. Since others could get a military position and excellent treatment through military merits, why couldn't they also be indomitable men? Just when everyone was holding their breath and wanted to get more military merits through hard work and desperation in this battle, it turned out that their master's son actually wanted them to rebel. This psychological contrast could be imagined. For a time, many people's faces showed signs of struggle. For everyone to have such a performance, it was already in Ivan's plan. During this period of time, he had also carefully observed that these guards under his command were indeed attracted by the military merits of the 5-star army. Some of them were far more enthusiastic than before when they were training. This was another important reason why Ivan still decided to make a move even though he knew that Yang Chendong might have noticed his rebellion. He was worried that after a long time, these guards would be loyal to the 5-star army. If that was the case, he wouldn't be able to find help when he had the chance. Just based on this point, he had to rebel. He had to rebel now. The famous Ivan the Great in history wasn't called for nothing. When it came to bewitching people, he wasn't much worse than the earliest political commissars of the 5-star army. He acted as if he didn't see the hesitation on everyone's faces and said, "You are all people that father-in-law once trusted. You are all the most outstanding youths of the Ross clan. You are all the future hope of the Ross clan. You shouldn't stay in the 5-star army and be enslaved by the Han people. Even our descendants will be born as slaves. On the contrary, we should be the ones standing at the top. Now, I am willing to invite everyone to fight for the future of the Ross clan. In the future, your names will be remembered by future generations. Your descendants will also be happy and proud to have ancestors like you. Brave warriors, please take out your sabers and wave your arms. Let's fight for the future of the Rossi clan. I, Ivan, hereby promise that no matter who you are, those who die in battle will be remembered forever. Those who survive will also enjoy endless glory and wealth. Now, let me ask you, are you willing to fight with this young master?" When he said this, Ivan intentionally glanced at Karela and a few other confidants in the crowd. Karela and the others, who had been waiting in the crowd for a long time, immediately waved their arms and shouted loudly, "Yes, yes." This shout, perhaps due to the crowd mentality, or perhaps because Ivan's eloquence was too good, painted a grand blueprint for everyone. In short, more and more people shouted that they were willing. In the end, all 500 warriors shouted in unison, as if anyone who fell behind was a coward. The morale was raised and everyone's enthusiasm was aroused. Finally, a satisfied look flashed across Ivan's face. "Good. Now, everyone follow this young master. Let's kill Yang Chendong and rebuild the Ross nation. Kill Yang Chendong and rebuild the Ross nation." Under the lead of Karela and the others, the shouts became louder and louder. Amidst the shouts, the 500 cavalrymen followed Ivan, who had already rushed out, and charged towards the central camp. Ivan's troops, who were less than 10 miles away from the central camp, separated from the main force when the sky turned dark. Because the order to retreat did not reach the ears of the 1,500 soldiers, They continued to advance according to the set goal, so the nearby allies did not notice this change. By the time they realized that something was wrong, the battle had already ended. As for the 200 black cavalry soldiers who stayed in the central camp, although the sky was already dark, none of them felt sleepy. This was because they knew that the real danger was about to come. Other than Yang Chendong, Ba Daojiang had the highest military rank among those who stayed behind. Before the sky turned dark, he had already called for the director of the field hospital that accompanied them to hide in the tent with the medical staff. No matter what happened outside, they were not allowed to come out. This was an order. The director was also confused. This was not the first time he had encountered a field hospital and a central military tent in the military camp. After all, they were non-combat troops and could play a very good role in treating the wounded. They did not need to go to the battlefield and would still be protected. But this time, it was the first time he encountered a situation where only 200 black cavalry soldiers were left in the central camp. Yang Chendong was Yang Xie's leader, the leader of the 5-star army. Leaving only 200 people to protect him was really puzzling. Could it be that there was a deeper meaning behind this? Although he was puzzled, the director did not dare to ask. He knew the rules of the army. If you should know, someone would naturally tell you. If you should not know, even if you asked around, you would not get any results. If you were not careful, someone might talk to you. If that was the case, you would be in trouble. Following Ba Daojiang's orders, the director arranged for the medical staff to stay in a few dozen tents. After giving them some short knives and other defensive weapons, he told them not to come out without orders. Even if they needed to go to the toilet, they could only do it in the tents. When the order was given, although many people were confused, no one dared to disobey a military order. As soon as these people hid themselves, a slight tremor came from the ground. A black night dragon guard who was in charge of night duty immediately ran to Ba Daojiang and saluted, reporting to the vice captain. Judging from the sound, it should be from the northeast. Got it? Continue to investigate, Ba Daojiang said with a serious face. At the same time, he muttered in his heart, "It better not be that Ivan who came to seek death. Otherwise, I will not be polite." About 3 minutes later, another soldier from the 5-star army came to report that there were about 500 cavalry soldiers. They were flying the flag of the 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. They were now less than 4 miles away from them. 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. After Ba Daojiang finished, he suddenly raised his head and said, "Do not let them come close to the camp. If they don't listen to the guards can do whatever they want." Ba Daojiang had a good memory. Because of the 6th young master's attention to Ivan, he knew that Ivan was serving in the 3rd Regiment of the Meng Army's 3rd Division. He did not believe that this was a coincidence. After the order was given, the original 10 guards quickly increased to 20 people. 10 of them were holding the 95-style swords, while the other 10 were riding on horses. This was to ensure that no matter if someone came close or tried to escape, they would be able to counterattack. The 20 black cavalry soldiers worked well together. Although there were only 20 of them, they gave off a feeling of an iron wall. This was Yang Xie's most elite combat team. Following Ba Daojiang's order, the soldiers shouted in the night to stop moving forward. However, it did not seem to be of any use. The horses were still approaching them. At this time, the number of black cavalry soldiers guarding the camp had increased to 100. Ba Daojiang could tell that there were about 500 horses. He was afraid that if there were too few soldiers guarding the camp, the enemy would rush in and threaten the 6th young master's safety. Chapter 1492. Ba Daojiang saw it as a huge test for him to be able to stay behind and bear such an important responsibility. He knew that no one in Yang Xie could defeat Yang Chendong in terms of individual strength. However, he still hoped to protect the 6th young master and not give him a chance to make a move. This was what a qualified Long Wei should do. Ba Daojiang was already paying attention to the enemy, but he still neglected one thing: Ivan's cunning. Just like how Yang Chendong was creating opportunities for the enemy to make a move, Ivan also felt that although the opportunity seemed good, it was also very dangerous. Therefore, he couldn't attack according to conventional methods. He had chosen to use the art of war to create a diversion. There were only 100 cavalrymen on the 500 war horses. They were responsible for feinting a frontal attack to attract the attention of the black cavalry. As for himself, he led the remaining 405 palace guards in 3 different directions and sneaked into the main camp on foot. Even though there were 400 of them, Ivan didn't intend to let them attack together. His goal was simple: to kill Yang Chendong. In order to achieve this goal, so what if he had to sacrifice the 500 people around him? In the eyes of those who wanted to achieve great things, they didn't care about trifles. In order to achieve their goals, they often used unscrupulous means. The lives of some lowly guards were nothing. Ivan's ruthlessness was beyond Ba Daojiang's expectations. Perhaps it was because of the different education methods they received. The former was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve their goals and viewed life as nothing. The latter valued the lives of his comrades more than the heavens. This difference in ideology was destined to make the latter suffer. Ivan approached the central camp on foot. He didn't see the black cavalry in the dark, but he believed that it wasn't that they didn't exist. It was just that the enemy hid well and he couldn't see them. He had a feeling that there were many pairs of eyes in the dark searching for him. When he thought about the 100 cavalrymen he sent to lure the enemy in, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Send the signal to the first squad. Tell them to attack. Ivan's eyes flashed with a vicious glint in the dark. Karela, who was beside him, agreed and lit the torch beside him. He raised it up and circled it around him. That was the signal to attack. 100 palace guards responded and rushed out from the east side of the central camp, charging out with lightning speed. There are enemies in the east. Stop them. Ba Daojiang heard the commotion from the east and immediately gave the order. A group of 30 black cavalry soldiers charged forward. However, 3 minutes later, another wave of battle cries came from the north. Ba Daojiang's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't sure how many people there were on the other side, but he was sure that it was impossible for the central tent to not be affected. 30 men go to the north. Ba Daojiang once again gave the order to split up his forces. Then he stared at his surroundings. He had a feeling that the enemies from the south would appear next. Sure enough, about 3 minutes later, battle cries could be heard from the south, and it seemed to be louder than the sounds from the north and east. Ba Daojiang couldn't stay calm anymore. He decided to report this to Yang Chendong. As soon as Hakidu Jiang turned around, Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden cape, walked out of the tent and stood behind him. Leave 10 people behind for me. For some reason, after hearing Yang Chendong's calm voice, Ba Daojiang, who was still a little flustered, instantly calmed down. Ba Daojiang saluted and left a squad of black cavalry soldiers behind. He led 40 men and charged towards the south, where the battle cries were the loudest. Beside the bonfire in front of the main tent, Yang Chendong in his golden cloak was particularly eye-catching. Perhaps this was his way of telling the enemy in the dark that he was here. If they wanted to take his life, they could come now. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the chance. Just as Yang Chendong looked into the darkness, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Then, there were more than a dozen, until there were more than 100 of them. The leader of this group was young Master Ivan of the Ross Duchy. You're finally here. Yang Chendong's voice was unhurried as he looked at the face that was revealed under the light of the bonfire. That's right, I'm here. What do you think? You didn't seem to think that you would lose the bait and lose the fish when you baited the fish. Yi Fan strode forward until he was 20 meters away from Yang Chendong before he stopped. He then asked aloud in a victorious manner. Haha, the outcome hasn't been decided yet. It's too early to say anything. I'm just curious. Don't you know how much effort your father-in-law put in to save your life? What you're doing now is equivalent to playing with fire. You're putting yourself in danger. This time, no one can save you. Yang Chendong looked at Ivan and said calmly. His face was full of curiosity. Playing with fire? Ivan chuckled, then squatted down beside the bonfire. He stretched out his hands and slowly moved them around the bonfire as if he was trying to warm himself. If you don't play with fire now, sooner or later, our Ross nation will be cooked by your slow fire. Am I right? Yang Chendong wasn't surprised that Ivan could see this. After all, he was Emperor Ivan the Great. His EQ and IQ were so high that ordinary people couldn't compare to him. Being able to think of this was also within Yang Chendong's expectations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to set up such a trap to lure the other party. It could be said that from the beginning, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of underestimating Ivan. That was why they had this conversation, this seemingly life-or-death crisis. If Yang Chendong had ignored the other party, he was afraid that his head would have been cut off by the other party without him even knowing it. Smart. Talking to smart people really saves a lot of trouble. If that's the case, then you should know that I can't only have 200 black cavalry guarding me, right? Yang Chendong asked with a mocking tone. Ivan, who was still in a victorious posture, couldn't help but tremble after hearing this sentence. Then, his eyes involuntarily scanned the surroundings. When he saw that there were no changes, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. When he looked at Yang Chendong, his eyes had a hint of viciousness. What? Do you still want to play tricks at a time like this? Or are you afraid and want to wait for the other black cavalry to come to your aid? Let me tell you, Ivan, won't give you such a chance. Come, charge and kill Yang Chendong. Whoever can do it, this young master will share the world with him. With great rewards, there will be brave men. Not to mention, those who were still by Ivan's side were the staunchest Rossi nationalists. They were the kind of people who would rather give up their lives to see the rise of their nation. Therefore, this shout was equivalent to an order. 100 guards shouted and charged with their swords raised. Protect the sixth young master. The remaining 10 Black Knight Dragon guards quickly tore off the black cloth behind their backs, revealing 10 shiny 95 style guns that had been polished with gun oil. No need, these people are all brave warriors, let them die under my sword. Yang Chendong said with a smile, as if he didn't take the enemies in front of him seriously. This scene happened to be seen by Ivan. For some reason, he had a bad feeling in his heart. Although he did check the movements of the various armies and observed the surroundings before making a move, he was sure that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army nearby. But there was always a possibility. This King Wunan of Damyang was someone who had conquered many places. Who knew if he had also conquered some powerful factions and teams when he conquered other nations? Just as Ivan's face was filled with suspicion, a series of screams suddenly sounded in his ears. As far as the eye could see, the palace guards suddenly fell to the ground one after another. Then, dozens of black figures appeared where they had been standing. They were all dressed in black, and even their faces were covered by black cloth, making it impossible to see their faces. These people had a common characteristic, and that was that compared to the tall and strong White Russians, they were usually shorter. Yes, these people were ninjas. Led by the special ninja under the Kurosawa, they were a surprise force arranged by Yang Chendong near the central army tent. The only thing that gave Ivan a headache was when he didn't give himself away. Once he decided to make a move, there was nothing to be afraid of. Because with the 500 palace guards in his hands, it was impossible for him to threaten Yang Chendong. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed evidence, he could have just sent a cavalry team to eliminate him. With the appearance of the ninjas, Yang Chendong became a spectator. Unknowingly, there was a large chair under his butt. He was sitting on it next to a bonfire. It was April, so the night was still very cold. Who are you people? Why are you helping the evildoer? If you retreat now, this Gongzi can pretend that nothing happened. Even though he knew it was useless, Ivan still shouted it out. This was his only hope now. Unfortunately, his shout didn't attract any response. It wasn't that the Kurosawa disdained to talk to him, but Ivan shouted in Russian. The other party couldn't understand, so how could they respond? Yang Chendong, who understood, laughed and replied for the Kurosawa. They are ninjas from the Japanese province. They like to use the environment to kill people without leaving a trace. Hehe, if we were to fight on horseback, these ninjas might not be your match. But in the darkness, on land, they are the true kings. Even this king's black cavalry can't compare. Chapter 1493. Ninjas from the Japanese province? They're actually not Han people. You actually dared to arrange such a strong force to protect you. Aren't you afraid that they'll betray you and do something that's not beneficial to you? Ivan asked in shock. At the very least, if it was him, he definitely wouldn't trust the strength of a foreign race so easily. Betray me? Why would they do that? Although the current Japanese people aren't the same as before, they've all moved away. But no matter where they go, as long as they're in my Yangtze territory, they can live a better and more stable life. They should be happy and satisfied right now, right? How could they think of harming this king? Ivan, not everyone is like you, an ungrateful wretch. Yang Chendong took this opportunity to mock Ivan. Bah, they're all fools. They were tricked by you, deceived by you. I'm sure they'll regret it in the future. Ivan shouted with a look of disagreement. Then, with tears in their eyes, they watched as the guards beside them were killed one by one. Many of them had only raised their swords to slash at the air before they were stabbed in the body or vital parts of their bodies from an unknown direction and died in battle. They won't regret it. As long as they can live a good life, who would rebel? Giving up a good life and risking their lives for an unknown future, who would be so stupid? Of course, it's undeniable that there are still some determined people who will do all kinds of things, but unfortunately, you won't be able to see it, right? Oh, you have to remember, the people who killed you weren't this king, but these Japanese ninjas. At the end of Yang Chendong's words, he seemed to have thought of something happy and laughed out loud. When Ivan heard all of this, his face was full of anger and unwillingness. Yang Chendong, you're too ruthless, too ruthless. Ivan's ruthlessness wasn't because Yang Chendong killed 500 of his people without blinking, but because the people who killed him were Japanese ninjas. And after Yang Chendong spread the news, if there were still Russian loyalists, the next target of their revenge would not be Yang Chendong, but these ninjas. This was simply a diversion of disaster. This move could be said to solve many problems once and for all. In this way, Yang Chendong would be completely out of the picture. Wasn't this ruthless enough? Thinking that from now on, even if his father-in-law who was under house arrest heard the news, he would only hate these ninjas even more, Ivan decided to escape. With the appearance of these kings of the darkness, it was impossible for him to kill Yang Chendong. Since that's the case, it's better to escape, at least he can't let Yang Chendong's treacherous plan succeed. Thinking like this, he said to Karela, who was still standing in front of him to protect him, "I'll leave this place to you. This Gongzi will take good care of your family in the future." Karela was stunned for a moment, but he quickly nodded. "Don't worry, Gongzi. Leave this place to me." "Good." Ivan was touched to have such a loyal subordinate, but just as he nodded, before he could turn around to escape, Karela already fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, blood was trickling out from his eyebrows. Just like that, Karela died without even being able to defend. The one who killed him was the special shinobi, Kushi. His figure was floating towards Ivan's position at this moment. The dark environment seems to be prepared for ninjas. This is their natural hunting ground. As Yang Chendong said, in this environment, ninjas can exert their full strength. In this environment, even if the Black Cavalry encountered them, it would be difficult for them to defeat them. Of course, it's also very difficult for ninjas to break through the Black Cavalry's most elite armor. Perhaps the final result would be a tie. In terms of defense, the Black Cavalry's tyrannical equipment is naturally unbreakable. In terms of offense, the ninja's illusory figure and tricky technique can be said to be invincible. After killing Karela, Blast Ishii set his next target on Ivan. Ivan's IQ was very high, and his heart was also very big. Especially in the later years of his life, he was even more meticulous, which led to his title of Ivan the Great. But in terms of power, he was only a little stronger than ordinary people, but still inferior to the fierce generals in the army. Now that he's so young, how could he be the opponent of Kushi? When the sword suddenly attacked in the dark night, he only saw a black shadow move. After he said the words, so fast, in his heart, his whole body trembled and he fell backwards. Ninjas have always been the main way to kill people, and after a successful attack, they will leave. Unless it's a last resort, they won't entangle with the target and the opponent. Special ninja Kazushige Ishikawa used it to the extreme. Under the cover of darkness, he slashed Ivan's neck with just one blow. When the main artery continued to spurt out blood, he had already left and went to the next target. Ivan died like this, quietly looking up at the starry night sky with a posture of looking up. His face was not ferocious, but also not peaceful. If you look carefully, there is a trace of confusion and unwillingness. Ivan's death proved a fact. That is, there will be no more Ivan the Great in history. His life was completely changed because of meeting Yang Chendong, and it was ended in advance. Just less than 2 minutes after Ivan's death, no white Russian soldiers could be seen outside the main tent. All of them died in the hands of a team of 50 ninjas. Their death only resulted in minor injuries to 3 ninjas. From the beginning to the end, 10 black cavalry stood around Yang Chendong to protect him, and they didn't even move a finger, and the matter was over. Very good, Kuishi, your task was done very well, and you will be rewarded. Yang Chendong said with a smile on his face. Thank you for the king's praise, this is what we should do. Kuishi said without the slightest emotion. Since they surrendered to Yang Chendong, these ninjas didn't have to worry about their livelihood and food. They could focus on training, and they became the primitive ninjas who didn't care about the world and only cared about martial arts. All of this is because of Yang Chendong. Now, they just killed some people for him, it's not a big deal. Good. Kuishi's attitude made Yang Chendong very satisfied. Then the space fell into silence. Yang Chendong didn't mean to let them leave, he wanted to do some things more seriously. Even so, it's not time for these ninjas to leave. At this time, the sound of gunshots could be heard in the night, and sometimes there was the sound of U-5 style. From this, it can be seen that the battle on the other battlefields is very fierce. About 10 minutes later, the first team returned, and soon the second team appeared, until the third team led by Hashirama returned. Hashirama was the one who was most worried about the safety of this place, but his opponents were twice as many as the others. He led 40 black cavalry to fight for a while, but even so, he was still a little late compared to the others. When he returned to the main tent, he saw the corpses lying on the ground. He couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Is the 6th young master okay?" "It's okay, thanks to the appearance of the ninjas. They killed Ivan and the rebels he brought with him." "Well, how's your situation? Are there any casualties?" Yang Chendong deliberately mentioned the ninjas in order to deepen everyone's impression. Reporting to the 6th young master, 7 of our black cavalry were injured, no one died. At the same time, we also captured a total of 73 rebels. Hearing that Yang Chendong was fine, Hashirama could finally breathe a sigh of relief, so he said in a deep voice, "Interrogate them well before it is announced, these people can't die." Hearing that so many people were captured, Yang Chendong's face showed a satisfied look. There were some things that couldn't be said by himself. If you said that Ivan rebelled, then so be it. There had to be evidence. Now, these 73 people were the witnesses. As long as this battle was won, he could push out these 73 people in front of everyone, and the news of Ivan's rebellion would spread everywhere. At that time, no one would be able to use this matter to blame him. After the order, the medical staff who had been hiding in the big tent also came out of the tent and began to check the wounds of the 7 black cavalry and bandage the wounds of the 73 captives. These people are very important, and before the facts are clarified, there can't be any problems. Ivan is finally dead. The crisis has been resolved. Yang Chendong returned to the big tent to rest. As for the other black cavalry, only half of them were left to guard with the ninjas, and the rest went to rest. In everyone's view, they just need to wait for the results of the victory on the front line. But they didn't know that a bigger crisis is coming step by step. Because Ivan's rebellion was too close to the main army camp, the Wara Wara scouts who were responsible for intelligence didn't see it too clearly. But the gunshots and shouts were still heard by them, and it was passed back to the leader Yeshin's ears. Such a thing happened, which was somewhat beyond Yeshin's expectation. He couldn't figure out what had happened, but one thing was for sure. Last night, there must have been a massacre in the 5-star Army's camp. Maybe someone rebelled, or the army of Ilkhanate killed their way to the main army camp. But in any case, this has nothing to do with Yes Hen. Unless he can be sure that Yang Chendong is dead, he will never stop. Well, the order is passed down, everyone take the time to rest. We will set off tomorrow at dawn. This time we won't stop until we achieve our goal. Chapter 1494. Time slowly passed, and the sky gradually brightened. A new day arrived as expected. 20 miles away from the central camp, Yes Hen led 30,000 elite cavalry to the camp. For the elite cavalry, it didn't take long to cover the distance of 20 miles. But before they even arrived, the rumbling sound of horses galloping could be heard. What's going on? Where did the cavalry come from? Ba Daojiang didn't sleep for the entire night, but he was still very alert. When he heard the strange movement, he immediately shouted towards the wooden building in front of the central camp. Cavalry? So many cavalrymen. The Black Knight Dragon Guard sentry on the wooden building let out a heart-pounding roar. Yang Chendong also heard the commotion and walked out of the central camp. Not only that, but the nearby medical personnel also walked out of the tent. Some of them were still rubbing their eyes sleepily, obviously not aware that they were in danger. There are about 30,000 cavalry, and they are flying the flag of the world of Wara, the flag of the world of Wara. The black cavalry sentry on the wooden building shouted with a trembling voice. After confirming the direction of the cavalry, Yang Chendong knew that something was wrong. Because that was his rear, there shouldn't be any large number of cavalrymen appearing. When he heard that there were 30,000 enemy cavalry, Yang Chendong's face sank. When he heard that the enemy was flying the flag of the world of Wara, his first thought was that it was Yes Hen, his old enemy. The world of Wara. Not good, sixth young master, please get on your horse and leave immediately. Ba Daojiang's face finally showed fear. This was different from other enemies. This was the world of Wara, and there were more than 30,000 of them. Their current defensive force, including the ninjas, was only about 200 people. As for the medical personnel, their combat power was negligible. Therefore, it was impossible for them to win, and the only way was to escape. Sixth young master, please get on your horse and leave. We are willing to bring up the rear and hold off the enemy with our lives. The other black cavalry dragon guards also reacted and knelt on the ground. Even the medical personnel were kneeling on the ground, begging for help. At this time, Yang Chendong's eyes were deep. Yi Zichen's sudden appearance was indeed beyond his expectations. Originally, he thought that the other party had escaped and that they would never meet again in this life. Even if they were to be found, it should be one of the other 5-star armies. But who would have thought that the heavens would be so kind to him? He had just gotten rid of a thorn in his side, Yi Fan, and now an old rival was sent to him. In Yang Chendong's heart, Yes Hen was also very important. Although he wasn't as important as Ivan, if he could get rid of him, Yes Hen was a good thing. Why couldn't he find them before? Now that it had delivered itself to his doorstep, there was no way he would miss such an opportunity. Escape? Yang Chendong's heart was calm, but his face was also very calm. He looked at Ba Daojiang and the others kneeling on the ground and made a gesture of supporting them. It's only 30,000 cavalry, there's nothing to be afraid of. Soldiers, take out your weapons and protect the main tent. Don't let the enemy rush in. Sixth young master, there are 30,000 of them. Ba Daojiang said with a hesitant expression. For a long time, Yang Chendong had formed a feeling of omniscience and omnipotence in their hearts. But this time, there were 30,000 of them, and they didn't even have a combat power of 300. The difference was too great. What? You don't have confidence in the young master? Yang Chendong looked at Ba Daojiang and asked. Then he laughed and said, if that's the case, let's see how the young master will turn your army into ashes with a smile. Was Yang Chendong arrogant? Of course not. He was someone who owned a large warehouse. What kind of advanced weapons did he not have? How could he be afraid of 30,000 enemy cavalry? Everyone was originally panicking, but they were all stunned by Yang Chendong's laughter. Just when everyone was wondering why the sixth young master was still laughing, Yang Chendong had already put on the golden robe. Sixth young master, what are you doing? If anyone is going to wear it, it should be me. Badao Jiang saw Yang Chendong's actions and wanted to snatch it. You can't wear this. Yang Chendong waved his arm and easily let Badao Jiang snatch it. He knew that Badao Jiang had good intentions and wanted to wear the robe to lure the enemy to chase him. Badao Jiang's intentions were good, but his ability was still lacking. Yang Chendong unfolded his robe and casually draped it over his body. He used his fingers to slowly tie a knot in front of his body. Then, Yang Chendong let out a long whistle, and the white dragon flew in front of him. Amidst the laughter, Yang Chendong leaped onto the horse. Wait for me to lure them away. You must protect your home well. Ha, you don't have to worry. I have already predicted this. I have already arranged 100,000 cavalrymen in the forest ahead. Dealing with them will be a piece of cake. As he spoke, he gave Badao Jiang a look that said, I'll leave this to you. Then, he exerted strength in his legs and urged his horse to charge towards the enemy. Seeing Yang Chendong get on his horse and leave, Badao Jiang wanted to follow closely behind. However, when he saw more than 1,000 medical personnel around him and recalled the sixth young master's instructions, he stomped his feet and gritted his teeth. Everyone listen to my orders. The women will hide in the tent. The men will collect their weapons. We must protect our home. When the sixth young master returns, we must all stand in front of the sixth young master. Badao Jiang's position here was the highest. Since he had already given his orders, even if the others were willing, they had to obey. Immediately, 200 black cavalry soldiers, 50 ninjas, and close to 200 male medical personnel came forward to collect their weapons. Yang Chendong galloped forward on his horse. His eyes were cold and murderous as he charged towards the enemy. Gale Leaf's golden robe fluttered in the wind. Even though the distance between the two parties was far, it was already very eye-catching. What is that? Seeing a warhorse approaching from afar, Yes Hen, who was charging at the front, couldn't help but slow down his horse out of instinct. This time, in order to achieve the goal of success in one strike, he had also put his life on the line. He had taken the lead and rushed to the front. It could be said that he had taken the lead. It was precisely because Yes Hen was charging at the front that he could see the enemy very clearly. When the distance between the two parties was less than 150 steps, Yes Hen finally saw the enemy clearly. Although he wasn't very clear due to the distance, he could vaguely see the shape of Yang Chendong. Ha, are you Yes Hen? Do you dare to fight one-on-one with this king? Yang Chendong also stopped his horse when he was 150 steps away. Not only was he not afraid of the enemy, he even issued a challenge loudly. It's Bugnam of Gojoseon. Hearing the voice that he had heard countless times in his dreams, Yes Hen instantly became excited. He didn't know that the five-star army's main camp was extremely empty in order to lure Ivan into a trap. At this moment, he didn't think so much. He only knew that the person in front of him was undoubtedly Yang Chendong. He couldn't be more familiar with that voice. As for that figure, even if it turned into ashes, he would still recognize it. It was precisely because of this that when he saw Yang Chendong personally coming out to greet him and even wanted to fight him one-on-one, he instinctively thought that the other party had some goal or even a trap. For a moment, he didn't dare to say anything and just stood there in a daze. Ha, cowardly child. Ha, giddy up. Seeing Yes Hen lead the army to stop, he felt proud when he thought about how he had defeated 30,000 soldiers and even suppressed the other party in terms of momentum. After a burst of laughter, he whipped his horse and galloped towards the not-so-big tree on the left. Just as he was wondering what Yang Chendong was up to and what he was going to do, he suddenly saw Yang Chendong walk in a different direction. After 2 breaths of time, he cried out that he had been tricked. At this moment, how could he not see that Yang Chendong was obviously afraid of him and wanted to escape? Who would have thought that the great King Wunan of Daemyeong, the war god Yang Chendong, who had the title of war god, would actually have a time when he didn't have any soldiers by his side? This is the heavens taking care of me. Since that's the case, boys, follow me and chase him down. Today, we will definitely kill Bugnam of Gojoseon on his horse and take revenge for our brothers who died. Yes Hen waved his saber and rode his horse. With a loud roar, he followed closely behind Yang Chendong like a gust of wind. After the other Mongol cavalry heard their leaders shout, they were all extremely excited. They followed behind Yang Chendong, shouting and yelling. At this moment, no one would have thought that such a thing would happen. No one would have thought that this mission would be so easy to complete. No one would have thought that the result of this charge would be so many people dying without a complete corpse. The battle at the front was in full swing. At this moment, the generals of the 5-star army did not think that behind them, their master, Yang Chendong, was being chased by 30,000 Mongol cavalry. After a day and night of rushing, the Russian 2nd Division became the first 5-star army to fight with the Ilkhanate army on the battlefield. Almost in a straight line, Agurav led his 50,000 soldiers to meet the Ilkhanate's 20,000 Mongol cavalry. Perhaps the enemy did not think that the 5-star army would advance so quickly. They were completely unprepared. They did not even have time to spread out their army, and the army behind them was still moving forward. Seeing this opportunity, how could Nikolaev let it go? He immediately shouted to encourage his soldiers, "Generals, the chance to kill the enemy has come. They don't have as many people as we do. Charge! Charge!" A total of 50,000 Mongol cavalry rushed out under the command of their general. In terms of individual size, the White Russian man was much taller than the Mongol. Adding on the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, their charge was full of momentum. Therefore, when they attacked, the 20,000 Mongol cavalry quickly ran away. Chapter 1495. These 20,000 Khaganate soldiers had been sent by Yusang. Originally, Harsan Khan had given them the task of forming a defensive line in the center to stop the charge of the 5-star army. If possible, it would be best to delay them and give the main force a chance to surround them. However, an army was still an army. It was impossible for them to be truly united. Seeing the cavalry of the 5-star army charge over, and the enemy outnumbered them, they were thrown into disarray. In addition, their defensive line had yet to be fully formed. Before they could even meet the enemy, they had already fallen into disarray. "Quick, send someone to inform Harsan Khan. Ask for reinforcements, ask for reinforcements." As the Yusang general fled, he sent out scouts on horseback to report the news. Compared to their primitive method of sending messages, the 5-star army's method of sending messages was far more advanced. Moreover, just the hot air balloons that floated in the sky from time to time had already clearly seen what was happening below. "Our 2 divisions are currently pursuing Yusang. There's no danger nearby. I repeat, there's no danger." On the hot air balloon, an Air Force soldier was using binoculars to observe the movements on the ground. At the same time, he was using flag signals to report to the surrounding hot air balloons. Just like that, while someone was watching from the sky, the 2 divisions on the ground boldly gave chase. This chase lasted for a full 50 li. Soon after, a signal came from the sky. On their left flank, 30,000 cavalry carrying the banner of the Crimean Khanate were circling around. What was even worse was that on their right flank, a group of 50,000 cavalry under the banner of the Khanate was also approaching from all sides. 30,000 plus 50,000 plus 20,000, that's a total of 100,000 people. On the ground, after seeing the news from the hot air balloons in the sky, Nikolaev did some calculations and realized that his forces were inferior. Thus, he decided to stop the chase and retreat from the battlefield. However, before he could do anything, the hot air balloons in the sky sent another message. Behind them, the 40,000 soldiers of the Mongolian 2nd Division, were approaching. Based on their speed, they should be able to reach the battlefield in less than an hour. 5 plus 4, that's 90,000 people. 90,000 against 100,000, this battle is still possible. After Nikolaev received the news, he quickly changed his mind. He immediately gave the order for the entire army to stop their pursuit and scatter iron caltrops on the ground to form a defensive formation. They were waiting for reinforcements to arrive so that they could attack from both sides. Before they set off, Yang Chendong had told them in front of the officers at the division level and above that the most important goal of this battle was to eliminate the enemy's power. Therefore, as long as the conditions were right, it was best to engage in a decisive battle with the enemy's main force when their own safety wasn't too threatened. This would save them the time to search for the enemy, which was beneficial to the 5-star army who had limited logistical resources. It was precisely because he remembered this sentence that Nicholas was thinking about whether he could have a decisive battle with the other party. Since he was the one who started the first great battle, he must have contributed a lot. After the division commander gave the order, the soldiers stopped their pursuit and began to get busy. Just as they began to wait for the enemy cavalry to appear and prepare for a big battle, the news of this place was spread by the Air Force. 60 li to the west of them was the world's 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Division commander, Su Kuda. This person, who was once the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, because he made a mistake, he was swapped with by Shuang, who was originally the commander. To tell the truth, he was in a very bad mood at that time, even though the 1st Cavalry Division was famous for its fighting prowess. But after being demoted from commander to commander, he still felt stifled in his heart. As the time he spent in the No. 1 Division grew longer and longer, he experienced the process of the No. 1 Division becoming the No. 1 Army. When he was promoted from the 4th Regiment commander to the 4th Division commander, he liked this army even more. He discovered that the world's 1st Cavalry Division was a wolf king in the wilderness. Compared to other armies, divisions, they had more war resources, which meant that they had more opportunities to fight on the battlefield. A general could only show his ability on the battlefield. Needless to say, the warlike Sukuda had long fallen in love with this place. At the same time, he also learned a lot from Commander Tian Hu and the other division commanders. Under his efforts, the strength of the 4th Cavalry Division continued to rise. Although his division was also a reinforced division, with 5 regiments, it still had 10,000 soldiers. But in terms of real fighting strength, even if they met 20,000 or 30,000 enemies on the battlefield, they still dared to fight and had a high chance of winning. Su Kuda regarded every battle as a learning experience. He hoped that he could grow better, so that he could bear a bigger burden in the future. But unfortunately, before coming to the battlefield, he wondered if he would be lucky enough to meet the first enemy. If it was as he wished, even if the enemy had 50,000 people, he would still dare to charge. He also believed that as long as he fought resolutely, tenaciously, and showed the might of the 4th Cavalry Division, it was not impossible for them to win. Unfortunately, his luck was not too good. The first battle was snatched by Nicholas of the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division. When he heard the news from the space that 50,000 people were chasing 20,000 people, although the other side's battlefield was not too far away, he still didn't want to interfere. Su Kuda didn't want to snatch other people's credit. Not to mention his own 60,000 people bullying the enemy's 20,000 people. But the situation of a battle always changed in an instant. Soon, another news came from the space. The Russian 2nd Cavalry Division was surrounded, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they joined forces with the nearby Meng 2nd Cavalry Division and prepared for a tough battle. 90,000 against 100,000, this is not fair? Well, if I add my own 10,000 people, then it would be fair. Su Kuda laughed after hearing the news. He knew that his chance to show his skills had come. Immediately, he ordered the army to change direction and rush toward the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division's location. At this time, at the Russian 2nd Cavalry Division's location, Nicholas didn't know that the battle here had attracted the attention of many people. Even the arrogant world's 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Cavalry Division was attracted by the battle here and was rushing over. At this time, he only knew that his 50,000 men were surrounded by the enemy's 100,000 cavalry. To many people, 100,000 was just a number that came out of their mouths. But when you see 100,000 cavalry in front of you, the feeling was absolutely different from what was said. It was absolutely spectacular. Layer after layer of enemy cavalry appeared and surrounded them from all sides. Seeing this scene, not only did Nicholas feel his whole body go numb, many of the soldiers also had the same thought. Let's talk about Nicholas himself. He was just a guardian of a small tribe with hundreds of people. Looking at the situation at that time, even if the Mongol cavalry sent out a small group of 50 people, they would be able to force him to retreat step by step. It was also very possible that they could even wipe out his tribe. And now, although he had gained some experience in the 5-star army, he was facing 100,000 cavalry this time. At this moment, his heart began to panic. He wasn't sure if he could stop the charge of the Mongol cavalry and didn't dare to guarantee that they could last until reinforcements arrived. But now that things had reached this point, even if Nicholas wanted to escape, he probably wouldn't have the chance. Moreover, he couldn't escape. He couldn't let down Yang Chendong's expectations of him. Everyone, put up your bows and arrows and shoot the enemies in the encirclement. According to what he had learned, Nicholas forced himself to calm down and loudly roared. No matter what, they had killed their way over from Eastern Europe and many of the soldiers had seen blood. Although today's battle was quite big, it wasn't enough to shake them. After hearing the commander's order, everyone quickly calmed down and went to their positions. The charging Khanate Alliance army was getting closer and closer. Finally, when they were less than 500 steps away, they were entangled by the caltrops on the ground. Many of the war horses were injured and many of the cavalry fell off their horses, causing the momentum of the charging cavalry to stagnate. Charge! Seeing that this was a rare opportunity, Nicholas swallowed his saliva and loudly roared. The 5,000 White Russian cavalrymen at the front charged forward. They held strong bows in their hands and shot out arrows one after another. Unfortunately, due to the lack of distance, many of the arrows didn't have the effect they should have. From this, it could be seen that in terms of cavalry usage, the White Russian army was indeed inferior to the Mongols who lived on horseback since young. After a wave of arrows, both sides were entangled. In an instant, the battlefield was filled with the sounds of killing and blood splattered everywhere. The stench of blood filled the air. The battle had begun, and both sides continued to send troops to the battlefield. This battle lasted for close to 6 hours. The Russian 2nd Division had paid the price of 8,000 men to block the attacks of the Khanate Alliance army. They had also endured until the arrival of the Mongol 2nd Division. He was originally the chief of a 30,000 tribe. Although he didn't have many people in charge, he had participated in many battles. The Mongol soldiers under him were carefully selected from the Golden Horde army. Although they couldn't be said to be 1 in 100, they were all equipped with good military qualities. With their arrival, the pressure on the Russian 2nd Division was reduced by a lot. The battle began to enter a state of stalemate. Back to the small forest, it was only a small forest that occupied 5 or 6 acres of land. Compared to the mountainous terrain of the Ilkhanate, it was nothing. Yang Chendong wore an eye-catching golden battle robe and rushed into the small forest, attracting Yeshen's main force here. Chapter 1496. Yes-Hen had only sent 1,000 cavalrymen to the 5-star army's main camp to scout out the enemy's strength and also to delay the 5-star army. He himself led 1,000 cavalrymen to chase after Yang Chendong. This was their ultimate goal. Before coming here, Yes-Hen had thought that he would encounter all kinds of problems. After all, as Yang Xie's territory grew bigger and Bugnam of Gojoseon's reputation became more prominent, things would only become more difficult if he wanted to harm Yang Chendong. Before coming here, Yes-Hen had even prepared for the worst, which was that he might not even be able to see Yang Chendong's true appearance even if he used up all 30,000 cavalrymen. However, Yes-Hen, who did not have many days left in his body, went all out. If he didn't kill Yang Chendong, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he died. What he didn't expect was that things would go so smoothly. Not only did they find Yang Chendong, but they also found Yang Chendong who was alone. Yes-Hen didn't really care that this person left the main camp and came to this small forest. It was just a small forest. Even if there was an ambush, how many people could there be? If that happened, his 30,000 cavalrymen would be able to drown the enemy with their spit. When they were 1,000 steps away from the small forest, Yeshen's shout was transmitted to the army. Quick, spread out the cavalry and surround this small forest. We can't let Yang Chendong escape. However, before the cavalry behind him could follow his orders, a series of rumbling sounds entered their ears. Then, under everyone's puzzled expression, a huge object suddenly rose from the sky above the small forest. A flying figure with a dark green shell suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. What was this thing that no one could name? It was because they had never seen such a thing before. For a green shell to be able to fly in the air and hover dozens of meters above the ground, the appearance of this object was beyond the imagination of many people. At this moment, they were at a loss for what to do. Following the appearance of the flying object, nearly 30,000 Walla cavalry stood rooted to the ground. They even forgot to charge, to advance, to disperse, and to draw their swords. Yang Chendong was sitting in the cockpit of the aircraft with a confident smile on his face. In this world, he was probably the only one who knew what this flying object was, the V-10 helicopter. The W-10 helicopter was 15 meters long when the rotor blades were rotating, 84 meters tall, and 35 meters wide at its widest point, including the short wings. It adopted the internationally popular tandem cockpit configuration, a narrow fuselage, and a 3-point anti-collision landing gear. It can carry 1,500 kilograms of ammunition, including 57 rockets and Red Arrow series anti-tank missiles. A 23mm machine gun was fixed in front of the cockpit. There was also a 14.5mm Gatling gun on the side, not the blue one, This was where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. Although the V-10 helicopter in the military warehouse was not the most powerful helicopter in the country, it was still an absolutely powerful weapon in this era. Even if he gave it to the research department in Resin City, they would not be able to replicate it. This kind of thing could only be found in the warehouse, and only Yang Chendong knew how to fly it. Now that he took it out, he wanted to get rid of Yes Hen once and for all. This once troublesome opponent was now a dead man. The V-10 helicopter flew straight into the air, then continued to climb until it reached a height of about 80 meters before it stabilized. The cannon inside the helicopter was aimed at the densely packed Walla cavalry below. A dazzling red light flashed, and a rocket flew at supersonic speed into the Walla cavalry's camp. Boom! With a flash of fire, the rocket launcher exploded on the ground. The shockwave from the explosion caused many of the newly grown trees in the nearby forest to be cut in half. This powerful force also created a huge gap in the Walla cavalry's camp. Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the cockpit, had good eyesight and powerful calculation ability. With just a rough calculation, he calculated the effect of directly or indirectly killing nearly 1,000 people. This was also because the Walla cavalry's camp was too densely packed. Otherwise, the effect would not be so good. After the successful attack, Yang Chendong did not hold back anymore. His right thumb kept pressing, and one rocket after another was fired at the Walla army's camp. Waves of people were thrown off their horses, and corpses were everywhere. Because Yes Hen was at the front, he was not injured by the rocket. However, he still saw everything that happened behind him. Seeing the self-proclaimed heroes, the elite warriors of the cavalry, being blasted to death one after another without even having the chance to wield their swords, and being blasted into pieces, and if they were sent flying by the aftershock, they would vomit blood and die. His heart would bleed. How did Yang Chendong come up with such an invincible weapon? He still remembered that when he first met Yang Chendong, he was stunned by the enemy's rocket that could hit dozens of miles away. He had no choice but to give up on the siege of the great Ming dynasty's capital. Even though many years had passed, Yes Hen still could not forget the scene at that time. And now, when they were gradually getting used to the powerful firearms and cannons of the 5-star army, the enemy came up with something that could fly. Moreover, it had such a powerful lethality, and he was once again heavily injured. When he thought about his physical condition, he was afraid that if he failed this time, he would not have the chance to kill Yang Chendong again. He felt his heart bleeding. Men, release the arrows and kill this flying object. Knowing that this was the last chance in his life, Yes Hen gritted his teeth and gave the order to shoot the aircraft. From here, one could see the last remaining elite cavalry of the Wara. Facing the indescribable flying object and the V-10 that had the power to kill them, they did not collapse like the other cavalry troops. Instead, after hearing the order from their leader, Yes Hen, one by one, They knocked their bows and quickly aimed at the V-10 in the air. They used all their strength to release the arrows in their hands. The V-10 rose 80 steps into the air, and under the strong gravity, these arrows without exception fell back to the ground. Even the best archer, the strongest archer, could only shoot 30 to 40 steps away. It was impossible to hurt the V-10 in the slightest. Yang Chendong had long thought of this result. He did not care about the arrows shot by the Walla cavalry. Instead, he used this opportunity to continuously fire rockets and kill the enemy as much as possible. Since even the V-10 was brought out, Yang Chendong did not plan to let these people go. He did not say that he had to kill all of them, but at least 90% of them would be killed. When only 10% of them were left, even if they went out and said something, how credible would it be? How big would their influence be? Everyone would probably call them lunatics. Artillery shells were fired one after another. In less than a quarter of an hour, the outside of the small forest was covered with the corpses of horses and cavalry. With a rough glance, the number of people had probably exceeded 10,000. Finally, under the powerful lethality and the fact that he could only passively take a beating, Yeshin's eyes revealed a look of despair. This feeling of being killed but not being able to hurt anyone at all made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. Looking at the flying object in the sky, he could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. Why was the five-star army always able to come up with an endless stream of unexpected weapons? Why was their heroic Wara Walla cavalry only able to passively take a beating without even being able to fight back? Could it be that Tengri had abandoned them? Leader, let's retreat. General Bo Muir came to Yeshin's side. He could feel the despair in Yeshin's heart. How could he not feel the same way? But in the face of the V-10, they were really helpless. They did not even have a flintlock. How could they compare with such a high-end helicopter? Retreat? Don't we have any other way? The enemy's artillery shouldn't be endless. Yes Hen said with a look of unwillingness. Just as Yes Hen said, there were not many artillery shells left in the V-10. Yang Chendong was not going to use them. It was not that he was reluctant to use them. There were many good things in the big warehouse. He did not use them because there were no large groups of enemies in his line of sight. It would be a waste to use the rocket launchers. Next, it was time for the machine gun to show its power. Yang Chendong gave up the 23mm machine gun and chose the 14.5mm Gatling gun. This machine gun had a fast firing rate and was powerful enough. At least, it was more than enough to deal with the Walla cavalry. After fixing the Gatling gun, Yang Chendong adjusted it to the best angle and used his skillful flying skills to start another massacre. The Gatling gun displayed its unique tyrannical side. Bullets flew, piercing through the air, piercing the skin of the cavalrymen. Lives were quickly drained away. One by one, the cavalrymen fell to the ground in despair. Even in death, they didn't understand what this flying object was. How many more weapons did it have? Could it win or not? Did they have the ability to fight back when it arrived? Their actions, or rather, their actions of throwing their lives away, were nothing. The sound of gunfire continued, and at the rate of thousands of shots per minute, the Walla cavalrymen who were still standing in place, seemingly waiting for their verdict, were shot down one by one. It was as easy as a human pulling out weeds. Under the intense gunshots, more and more Walla cavalry were killed. This tragic scene, or rather, this helpless scene, finally crushed the hearts of the cavalrymen. When they realized that there was nothing they could do but die here, they began to flee. Chapter 1497. With the first to escape, there would be a second. They were already under great psychological pressure and were about to collapse. Now that there was such a fuse, everyone followed suit. In this way, these people quickly formed a torrent. In a short period of time, the number of cavalry that escaped had reached thousands. In the cockpit of the V-10 helicopter, Yang Chendong looked at the Mongolian cavalry that had gathered together again. He placed the Gatling gun to the side and then pressed the button to launch the rocket. There was a hint of madness on his face as he said, "You think you can come and go as you please? Where do you think this is, huh?" As soon as the word left his mouth, a rocket whizzed out and landed right in the middle of the fleeing cavalry camp. At that moment, the rocket hit at least dozens of people, shattering their bones and killing them on the ground. The powerful aftershock set off a huge wave that overturned the Mongolian cavalry that were more than 10 meters away. Their horses were sent flying and the cavalry fell to the ground. It was a tragic death. After the rocket, Yang Chendong once again controlled the Gatling gun. He liked the feeling of chasing after the enemy and firing continuously. At this time, he couldn't help but think of Beta Persei. If this person was here, he would probably be shouting excitedly while firing. The gunshots continued, and under the continuous gunshots, more and more Walla cavalry were killed on their horses or thrown away because their horses were shot. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. In less than an hour, more than half of the nearly 30,000 Walla cavalry had been killed or injured. On the battlefield, other than 1,000 people who were lucky enough to escape, there were less than 5,000 cavalry led by Yes Hen. Bo Muir, I order you to take the people and leave here. In the future, if the Wara people want to survive, they will need a certain amount of armed forces. In the future, I can't protect them anymore. It's up to you. At this moment, Yes Hen began to entrust the children to him. The cruelty of reality and the appearance of the V-10 helicopter made Yeshen's heart completely despair. He finally realized that all along, Bugnam of Gojoseon had never taken him seriously. Otherwise, if he had taken out such a flying object earlier, he would not have been able to do anything. And now, even though he knew, he did not plan to leave. Since he couldn't take revenge, even if he died, he would die in the hands of his enemy. This could be considered a kind of heroism, a kind of fulfillment of his wish. Chief, Bo Muir was stunned when he heard Yeshen's words, and then tears came out of his eyes. All right, a real man bleeds, not tears. Don't cry anymore. Take these cavalrymen and leave. Remember, don't think about revenge in the future. This Bugnam of Gojoseon is a devil, a man blessed by the heavens. We are no match for him. Yes Hen acted as if he was an experienced person and wanted to continue giving orders. However, the sudden attack of a rocket launcher made him go completely crazy. On the ground, the Walla cavalry had already scattered. Yang Chendong's goal should have been achieved, because those who wanted to kill him had either escaped or been killed. But with his flying glasses, he still found Yeshen's location. Seeing that the Walla's chief was still alive, he couldn't help but sigh at his luck. Since that's the case, he will give him another rocket launcher. He doesn't believe that people can be made of iron. Even if they are made of iron, he will refine them into water. As such, just as he was about to instruct Bo Muir about the matters behind him, a rocket suddenly exploded a dozen meters away from him. The powerful shockwave directly sent Bo Muir, who was facing the shockwave of the rocket, flying away. Yes Hen was lucky. His back was facing the direction of the rocket launcher, so he didn't die immediately. Instead, he was injured by the aftermath and fell to the ground. But even so, he was seriously injured. A large piece of shrapnel was embedded in his back. Under the medical conditions at that time, it was very difficult to save him. After lying on the ground for a long time, Yes Hen slowly raised his head and saw the scene of Bo Muir bleeding from the corner of his mouth and dying not far away. Bo Muir was his hope and the protector of the Wara tribe in the future. Without him and Bo Muir, what should they do if someone bullied their tribe? He originally wanted to kill Yang Chendong, but not only did he fail to hurt Yang Chendong in the slightest, he even lost his own Bo Muir. This result made him angry and unwilling to accept it, and he cursed loudly, F***CK. This was the final voice of the once ambitious and ruthless character. After shouting this sentence, he exhausted the last bit of strength in his body and turned around. Because of this, the shrapnel penetrated deep into his body. Yes Hen didn't care about all this. He just looked up at the sky. At this time, the sky in his eyes was so blue and clear that people couldn't help but linger back and forth. Cough. With a light cough, blood flowed out from the corner of Yeshen's mouth, and then more and more blood flowed out. Slowly, Yes Hen died with his eyes wide open. Perhaps when he died, his heart was full of unwillingness, so he couldn't close his eyes in peace. In mid-air, Yang Chendong finally stopped shooting. As far as the eye could see, it was difficult to find a single living person in the huge battlefield. Apart from a few lucky warhorses circling in place, there were no other living creatures in sight. "AI, why did you seek your own death?" Yang Chendong, who had calmed down, looked at the massacre in front of him and couldn't help but shake his head. He was not a bloodthirsty person, but there were some things that he had to do. Unknowingly, the warrior 10 had disappeared. Yang Chendong untied the reins of the white dragon tied to the tree stump and rode it back to the central camp. From the time Yang Chendong left until his return, nearly 4 hours had passed. For nearly 4 hours, the people in the central camp were worried about his safety. Only when Yang Chendong returned unharmed did everyone breathe a sigh of relief. Then Yang Chendong saw a lot of people cleaning up the battlefield. 1,000 Wala cavalry launched an attack on the main camp. Although they had the advantage in numbers, they were facing the black cavalry dragon guards who were wielding the 95 style. In the end, not a single one of them was left alive as corpses. Ba Daojiang came forward and reported the battle. Then, he remembered the Wala cavalry and couldn't help but ask curiously, "Sixth young master, was it Yes Hen who came?" Yang Chendong knew what he wanted to ask. He also knew that some things couldn't be hidden. After all, more than 20,000 people died. If they didn't deal with it properly, it would be a big problem if there was a plague. Yang Chendong said that he wanted to say it, but he could choose to say it. Yes, it was Yes Hen who came, but he's already dead. Most of his cavalry was also killed by our ambush. It's just that they still have things to do, so they left in a hurry. How about this? You take half of the people to clean up the battlefield. Oh right, there are too many corpses. We don't have enough people, so we can burn them. Hearing that the ambush had left, Ba Daojiang didn't ask any more questions. In his opinion, this was a normal thing. After all, their opponent this time was the 300,000 cavalry of the Khanate. Although they had 400,000 soldiers and had a slight advantage, they weren't as familiar with the terrain as the enemy. Moreover, even in a war, one should use all their strength and not hold back at all. Ba Daojiang nodded understandingly. Then he led 100 black cavalry and 600 to 700 medical personnel to the battlefield in the small forest. However, when they arrived at the battlefield, although many of them had already experienced large and small battles, some of them couldn't help but vomit on the ground. The situation on the battlefield was simply too tragic. There were countless people with broken limbs, and dead limbs were strewn all over the place. It was like a living hell. Ba Daojiang didn't vomit. After a long period of training, his tolerance in this aspect was very high. However, what he couldn't understand was why he didn't see any corpses of his own soldiers on the battlefield. More than 20,000 enemy cavalry died here, and they were the elites of the Wara. They were also people who had survived countless battles. They shouldn't have been unable to fight back. Could it be that their corpses had been carried away? Well, that was the only possibility. However, which army could do this? From the looks of the battlefield, there were many deep craters caused by cannons. It should be the work of the Lung Feng division. Who cooperated with them? Ba Daojiang had some doubts in his heart, but considering that all of this was arranged by the sixth young master, he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he started to burn the corpses. Whether it was Ivan's rebellion or Yeshen's sudden appearance, it didn't affect the battlefield at all. On the main battlefield, it didn't have much of an effect. The soldiers also didn't expect that their southern Wu King would encounter danger one after another in such a short time. At this time, they didn't know that they were fighting with the Khanate army or preparing to fight. The two divisions of Russia and Meng Er had already gathered their forces and their strength had increased greatly. Meng Er, he was able to lead 40,000 soldiers because of Yang Chendong's favor. This number was even more than the number of tribesmen he had before. Because of this, he decided to perform well. This battle was the time for him to prove his ability. Because of this, Meng Er fought very fiercely as soon as they arrived. Both sides were people who lived on horseback, and the battle was very lively. Victory and defeat couldn't be decided in a short time. However, the five-star army's fighting spirit was different from the Khanate army's passive fighting spirit. Gradually, the scales of victory began to shift towards the five-star army side. This was the effect produced by the difference in the system. Let's talk about the Khanate army first. They had no choice but to fight. It seemed like they were protecting their own territory and were acting in a righteous manner. However, these Khanates were all aristocrats, which meant that 90% of the wealth was in the hands of less than 5% of the nobles. Ordinary people could only fight for the remaining 10% of the wealth with 95% of the population. Chapter 1498. Under such an unequal situation, even if the Mongol cavalry achieved military merits, the rewards they received were few and far between. This caused them to lose their motivation because they were not fighting for themselves, but for the nobles and aristocrats. Looking at the five-star army, it looked like they were the invaders and should belong to the unjust side, but the excellent treatment of soldiers and military merit system filled everyone with motivation and confidence. Through military merit, they could let themselves and their families live better lives. As long as they worked hard and dared to risk their lives, they might be able to obtain more. Moreover, the five-star army's military rules were there, so there was no need to worry about anyone stealing your military merit, because if that was the case, you could appeal to the military inspection department. Once it was verified, not only would your military merit be returned, but whoever took the merit would also be punished. Even if the person who took the merit was a battalion commander, regiment commander, or even a division commander, they would still be treated equally. Like this, who would dare to break this taboo? Who would dare to cross the line? This protected the rights of the ordinary soldiers, so that they would not shed blood or cry when fighting with their lives on the line. Under the highly stimulating military merit system, everyone wished that they could go to the battlefield every day. Under this kind of mentality, compared to the Khanate Alliance Army soldiers who were just muddling along, the results of the battle would naturally be different. Not to mention, the world's 1st Cavalry Army's 4th Division commander, Su Kuda, had suddenly arrived on the battlefield. Moreover, he had unrestrainedly launched an attack from the flank. It had to be said that the Khanate Alliance Army scouts were not incompetent. They had already noticed a group of 10,000 cavalry that had suddenly charged in from the other side of the battlefield. However, the analysis of the higher-ups was that this group of 10,000 cavalry would definitely meet up with the Mongol-Russian army on the other side before launching an attack. This erroneous analysis caused them to be caught off guard. As a result, when the sky turned dark, Su Kuda led his army without stopping to rest. After arriving at the battlefield, they immediately threw themselves into the battle and disrupted the Khanate's allied forces' arrangements. Moreover, the world's 1st Cavalry Army had 7-star crossbows, and the soldiers' quality was very high. They were skilled in horsemanship, and their blade techniques were exquisite. They also took the initiative to attack, making the first move to gain the upper hand. Therefore, when they appeared, they dealt a heavy blow to the Khanate Alliance Army. By the time they reacted and began to deploy their cavalry to defend the battlefield, they were already one step behind the enemy. It's our reinforcements, the elite 4th Division of the 1st World Cavalry Army. Nicholas and received the news at the same time. After looking at each other, they made the same decision. They would immediately take advantage of the situation to launch a counterattack. They would cooperate with the world's 1st Cavalry Army to give the enemy a heavy blow. Perhaps this would be a good opportunity to annihilate the enemy. Immediately, the Russian and Mongol divisions blew the horn for the charge. Tens of thousands of cavalry pressed forward like an avalanche, charging into the main camp of the Khanate Alliance. While the battle here was in full swing, on the other main battlefield, the two sides were also at daggers drawn, ready to fight at any time. The two divisions of Lungfeng were surrounded. Two mixed cavalry divisions of the 3rd Army were also surrounded, totaling around 30,000 people. The one who surrounded them was Hazen Khan of the Ilkhanate. He brought along 70,000 cavalrymen from his own country and 20,000 cavalrymen from the Kazakh Khanate. A total of 90,000 people formed a huge encirclement. With 3 times the number of troops, they held the initiative. If it wasn't for the fact that the sky was already dark, they would have already launched their charge. Order all the troops to be on duty at night. Don't allow a single member of the 5-star army to escape. Hazen Khan said with a smug look on his face. Previously, Alatang had risked his life to learn of the 5-star army's attack plan from Ivan. Others didn't believe it, but he did. He had arranged his army here in advance, and sure enough, a 30,000-strong army of the 5-star army was passing by. But they were blocked by him, and were completely surrounded. Although 30,000 people weren't too important for the 5-star army, who had an army of 400,000. However, if he could wipe out all 30,000 people here, it would be a big victory. When the Khanate Alliance army held a meeting, he, Hazen Khan, would be able to straighten his back. Looking at the pitch-black night outside, Harsenhan was a little worried at this time. He was afraid that the 5-star army would choose to break out in the middle of the night. Therefore, he ordered them to be on guard and not allow a single member of the 5-star army to escape from their encirclement. The sky will brighten soon. At that time, it will be time for our blades to drink blood. Hazen Khan chuckled as he looked forward to it. Compared to the nervousness of the Khanate Alliance army, the 30,000 5-star army soldiers weren't idle either. However, they didn't have any intention of breaking out of the encirclement. Instead, they dug trenches throughout the night. The entire 2 divisions of Lungfeng were here. If they wanted to display their advantage, they needed enough trenches. Only then could they display their powerful firepower. As for the enemies surrounding them, Division Commander Xiao Feng didn't have any misgivings. He thought that the number of Khanate Alliance army cavalry surrounding them was still too small. There were less than 100,000 people and it wasn't enough for them to eat. Of course, according to the rules, regardless of whether they thought highly of the Khanate Alliance army on the outside, since they had discovered the enemy's main force and were surrounded, they had to report this matter. Moreover, they had to spread the news to their allies nearby. Commander Wu Sheng of the 3rd Army, who was 150 kilometers west of them, received the news. What? Our 2 mixed cavalry divisions are surrounded? Then we have to go and save them. Immediately send a telegram to the 6th young master and tell him our thoughts. Xiao Feng became excited after receiving the news. It could be said that his luck wasn't very good. They had been out for 2 days and had passed through many places, but they hadn't encountered the Khanate Alliance army cavalry. This could only mean that they had gone in the wrong direction. Since that was the case, they had to adjust their direction. But where exactly to go was also a problem that gave him a headache. Now that they had learned that the 2 divisions of the Cold Front Division were surrounded, they had found one of the main forces of the Khanate Alliance army. Even if they couldn't eat the meat, they could at least drink the soup. With this thought in mind, Wu Sheng sent a telegram to Yang Chendong to ask for instructions on the pretext of saving his 2 mixed cavalry divisions. In the central camp, the danger was already far away. Yang Chendong had also returned to his own tent. Wang Shan, the director of the communications department, was also in the tent. He was delivering the received telegrams to Yang Chendong so that Yang Chendong could better understand the situation of the battlefield. Yang Chendong saw the telegram from the 3rd Army as soon as it arrived. How could he not see that Wu Sheng couldn't find the enemy's main force and wanted to use this opportunity to get a share of the loot? If any other officer had made such a request, he would naturally refuse. This piece of meat was found by the 2 divisions of the Cold Front Division, so how could anyone else snatch the benefits? But since it was a telegram from Wu Sheng, it was a different story. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong felt that he had let Wu Sheng down. He had left him for 10 years in Eastern Europe without any reinforcements. He had to face the 2 behemoths of the Golden Horde and the Rasi Principalities. He could imagine how difficult it must have been. Speaking of which, Wu Sheng's 3rd Army could also be called the 3rd Army of the Cold Front Division. But because they had been separated for so long, many excellent soldiers had been killed in battle. That was why they were no longer as strong as they used to be. Although they had recovered from the recruitment, their fighting strength was far from what it used to be. Right now, they wanted to make a contribution. Moreover, there were 20,000 soldiers from the 3rd Army surrounded. It was reasonable for them to send reinforcements. Okay, send a telegram to Commander Wu Sheng and agree to his request. Yang Chendong gave his answer after some consideration. If Wu Sheng was allowed to go, then the other armies wouldn't be so lucky. They would have to find their own opportunities. In contrast, the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Tianhu, had his own plans. As the strongest army in the world of cold weapons, Tianhu had his own pride. He couldn't do things like knowing the intelligence of others. What he needed to do was to make use of his own advantages and make greater contributions. What were the advantages of the world's first cavalry army? Without a doubt, they had the fastest warhorses and the strongest cavalry, as well as the 7-star crossbow, which was an excellent weapon for shooting enemies at close range. With so many advantages, they were destined to not be an ordinary army. Only greater contributions were worthy of them. And what was this contribution? In Tianhu's eyes, it was to directly attack the enemy's den and take down the capital of the Ilkhanate, Dabuli. Speaking of which, the Ilkhanate had long been destroyed. They were now known as the Zarathir dynasty, and their capital was in Dabuli. This name was nothing more than a means used by Harsan Khan to maintain the same status as the other Khanates. This time, in order to stop the 5-star army from coming to the west, Harsan Khan had mobilized almost all the forces that could be mobilized within the kingdom, and then sent his troops out of the capital. He wanted to stop the 5-star army outside, and even severely injure them. The idea was good, but the reality was cruel. How could they achieve it just by thinking? For this battle, Harsan Khan had conscripted all the men above the age of 14 in the country, making their capital Dabuli very empty. According to the information from the intelligence department, there were less than 5,000 soldiers in the city. This was an opportunity. As long as they were fast, it was very likely that they would be able to take down Dabuli and completely cut off the connection between Harsan Khan and his base. At that time, the enemy would be in chaos when they heard the news. That would be the time for the 5-star army to win. Chapter 1499. It was easy to take down Tabulia, but the subsequent matters would be troublesome. The other Khanates would also not sit back and watch such a thing happen. They would definitely send their troops here and even surround them. They would not allow the 5-star army to gain a foothold in the city. In other words, there was a risk in doing this. If they did not do well, they might be surrounded. Others might be afraid, but the world's first cavalry army led by Tianhu would not be afraid. To him, this kind of challenge was exciting enough to show the true strength of the world's first cavalry army. Of course, Tianhu was not a blindly arrogant person. Before taking action, he decided to accumulate more strength. For example, he would mobilize the 5 divisions under him to strengthen his own strength. This was like forging iron, one needed to be strong. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th divisions rushed over after receiving the order. Only the 4th division was busy helping the Russian and Mongolian divisions. They did not have the chance to come and help. Because of this, Tianhu decided not to wait for them. After all, speed was the most important thing in war. Opportunities on the battlefield were fleeting. It was impossible to wait for someone. Pass down the order. The army is to attack. The target is Tabulia city, the capital of the Ilkhanate. Tianhu did not want to wait any longer. Time waits for no one. Therefore, after he gave the order, the 45,000 soldiers of the world's first cavalry army quickly approached Tabulia city from all directions. The world's first cavalry army and the Cold Front 3rd Cavalry Army both moved. Everyone had their own target. This was where the strength of Yang Chendong's battlefield command came into play. Unless there was a complete plan, the generals could do whatever they wanted on the battlefield. Unless there was no other choice, Yang Chendong would not blindly give orders. This was because he knew that sometimes, a delay in giving orders could cause the fruits of victory to be lost. In order to prevent this from happening, he would not give orders. Instead, he would let the division commanders do what they wanted. Tianhu and the others were already used to this method of command. Therefore, after they made the decision, they only needed to report the purpose of their trip via telegram before taking action. Compared to the 3rd Corps of the Cold Front, which was drinking soup, the world's 1st Corps of Cavalry had to launch a surprise attack. Beta Persei led 1,800 black cavalry soldiers, as well as the troops of Meng 4 Regiment Baruch and Meng 5 Regiment Wuduo that they had encountered on the battlefield. They were rushing towards the Norman Khanate day and night. Although it was called the Norman Khanate, it was nothing more than a small country with a population of less than 800,000 people. Or rather, it was just a large tribe. It was only because their location was not bad, belonging to the borderlands, that they were not too valuable, that they were not affected by the chaos and were not destroyed. This time, the fearless Beta Persei had arrived. It was destined that the Norman Khanate would not be able to escape the fate of destruction. Of course, their target this time was the Ilkhanate. If it were someone else, they would not cause trouble. Even Tian, who had only taken the capital of the Ilkhanate, which was already somewhat out of the battlefield. However, the fearless young heir had indeed pointed his troops at the Norman Khanate. Just this action alone was completely out of everyone's expectations. When Beta Persei decided to do this, it was because he thought that his 400,000 men, the Air Force, and the elite forces of the Cold Front would be a waste of talent to deal with the Khanate's allied forces that barely managed to gather 300,000 cavalrymen. This kind of battlefield could not satisfy him. There was no space for him to display his skills. Therefore, after looking at the map, he decided to attack the Norman Khanate. But after all, he only had 1,800 cavalrymen. Although they were the most elite black cavalry, their strength was still too weak. Coincidentally, he had learned the location of Meng 4 Regiment and Meng 5 Regiment commander through the help of the Air Force. He immediately rushed over and asked the 2 division commanders to assist him. Who was Beta Persei? It was not an exaggeration to say that he was Yang Chendong's shadow. He was one of the closest people to him. As the saying went, the gate of the Prime Minister was a 7th-ranked official, not to mention an important position like Beta Persei. Towards the request of such a person as former surrendered generals, how could Barry and you two dare to refuse? After Yang spoke to them, the 2 of them readily agreed. Not only that, they also followed Yanger's instructions and shut down the military radio stations. After that, the 80,000-plus soldiers of the 3 armies seemed to have suddenly disappeared. They left the battlefield and headed straight for the Norman Khanate at an oblique angle. After 3 days and 3 nights of hurrying, they had already arrived at the Norman Khanate. In order not to alert the enemy and let the enemy be on guard, Beta Persei led the army to choose a small path. Thus, when they suddenly appeared in front of the capital of the Norman Khanate on the 6th day, the people there were frightened. Outside the city, 80,000 Han soldiers holding the 5-star flags suddenly appeared like divine soldiers descending from the sky, causing Saihan to turn pale with fright. He immediately sent his general Tuyabai out of the city to meet the enemy. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the 5-star army had not yet gained a firm foothold and take the initiative. Tuyabai was a general of the Norman Khanate and was very brave. Usually, 4 or 5 people would not be able to get close to him. Such a person naturally had his own pride. When he appeared on the battlefield, he immediately rushed forward on horseback, clamoring to challenge the generals of the 5-star army. Ba Lu and Wu Tuo naturally could not tolerate this. This was a very good opportunity to show off in front of Beta Persei, so they did not want to let it go. While the 2 of them were still thinking about who would rush out to fight, Beta Persei, who was wearing a purple cloak, had already rushed out. This was not the first time Beta Persei had encountered this kind of one-on-one battle. He gradually fell in love with this kind of feeling, especially when he chopped off the enemy's head with his sword and the soldiers on his side let out a deafening roar, which filled him with a sense of satisfaction. Now that someone actually wanted to challenge him to a one-on-one battle, how could he not satisfy such a request? Laughing loudly, he spurred his horse out. In the Black Cavalry camp, not only were the first Captain Chiu Vi and the second Captain Dao Shao not worried, they were even having an intense discussion, arguing about how long it would take for Beta Persei to kill the enemy general. 15 rounds should be about right. Chiu Vi imitated Yang Chendong and said confidently. I say 10 rounds should be enough. Dao Shao raised a different opinion, his face also showing a confident smile that resembled Yang Chendong's. The 2 of them each expressed their own opinions, looking as if they would not give in to the other. Ba Lu and Wu Tuo were shocked by this scene. This was a battlefield, not a drill. How could they be so relaxed and natural, as if they did not take Beta Persei's life seriously? Were they really that confident? While the two of them were still curious and puzzled, Beta Persei had already collided with Tuyabai on the battlefield. As the warhorses crossed each other, a sword and a spear clashed and separated. Tuyabai used a long spear, and at a glance, it was obvious that he was a powerful general. He relied on this great strength to take down Beta Persei's celestial saber. But in terms of strength, how could Beta Persei be afraid of others? Seeing the other party's long spear coming, he deliberately held back half of his strength and met the other party head-on. Clang! With one clash, the celestial saber in Beta Persei's hand trembled. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Haha! Tuyabai, who had used all of his strength, did not know that the previous attack was just a probing move. He thought that this was Yang Er's full strength, and could not help but feel a surge of confidence, once again thrusting his spear forward. After the test just now, both of them knew what was going on. Beta Persei did not believe that the other party would have the same idea as him. This could be seen from the laughter just now. Since he was so proud, now was the time for him to cry. Beta Persei, who was riding on the horse, calmed his dantian and switched his sword to his left hand. Just as the two horses were about to pass each other, he suddenly stretched out his right arm and touched the other party's long spear. Beta Persei dared to do this because he was confident in his own strength and the plate armor on his body. This was the armor that the engineers of Crimson City's munitions factory spent a lot of effort and went through countless improvements. It could be said that it was invulnerable. With this, he could ignore any attack from the other party for a short period of time. Beta Persei did not dodge and stretched out his hand to meet the attack, which was greatly beyond Tuyabai's expectations. In such a short time, his spear had already swept across Beta Persei's body. Sure enough, the spear did not pierce through the armor, but only scratched it. Seeing that his attack had failed, Tuyabai instinctively retracted his spear. But at this time, Beta Persei's right arm, which had already stretched out, began to exert force and suddenly grabbed the spear. Tuyabai's body uncontrollably moved forward and came in front of Beta Persei. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 40 centimeters. Beta Persei laughed and waved his left arm. Tuyabai screamed and a big head flew into the air. Tuyabai's body fell to the ground and died in battle. It had only been 2 rounds. The first round was a test, the second round was a killing move, and it was a success. Seeing this scene in the eyes of the two generals, Barry and Wu Tuo, they were naturally shocked. Even Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao shut their mouths at this moment. After all, it was far beyond their expectations to kill the enemy generals so quickly. After killing Tuyabai, Yang Er took the opportunity to point his saber forward and roared, "Soldiers, follow me and kill." Yang Er's saber was pointed forward and he shouted, "Soldiers, follow me and kill." Kill. The first to rush out were the 1,800 black cavalry soldiers. They had long been used to attacking in any situation and environment. After years of hard training, even when they were sleeping, they would jump up and draw their swords when they heard the general's order. Chapter 1500. 1,800 black cavalry, armed to the teeth, swarmed out like a black dragon and charged towards the capital of the Norman Khaganate. This scene caused the enemy cavalry to turn and flee. Even their general, Tuyabai, had his head chopped off in just 2 rounds. They did not think that they were that powerful. The cavalry of the Khaganate turned and fled, giving Beta Persei and the black cavalry an opportunity. They galloped their horses and followed the Mongol cavalry into the city. On the city gate tower, Saihanhan saw all of this with his eyes. When he saw the 5-star army charging into the city so easily, he angrily shouted, "Shoot the arrows, shoot the arrows. Don't let them enter the city. Kill them and close the gates." Saihanhan's reaction was very fast. The guards beside him were also very supportive. They took out their bows and shot down the city wall, trying to stop the black cavalry from advancing. In order to achieve their goal, some of the black cavalry soldiers who were close to the black cavalry also became their targets. Arrows rained down like rain. The Mongol cavalrymen, who were poorly equipped and defenseless, were shot by the arrows. All of them cried out in pain and fell from their horses. On the other hand, the black cavalry's armor was very good. The arrows did not have much effect on them. Kill anyone who approaches the city gate. Create the conditions for the rest of the army to enter the city. Yang was riding on his warhorse. He waved his arms and cut down 3 Mongol cavalrymen who charged at him. Then he shouted at the other black knights and dragon guards. With Beta Persei's order, a group of 100 black cavalry soldiers immediately arrived in front of the city gate. They formed a tight formation and faced the Mongol cavalry who came to attack the city gate. Crossbows appeared in the hands of the black cavalry soldiers. This kind of crossbow, which had great lethality at close range, was very suitable to deal with the current situation. With someone guarding the city gate, Beta Persei led the other black cavalry soldiers into the city. He wanted to find out where the palace was, but he did not expect to hear someone shouting for the Khan to leave quickly. Following Yang Chendong would give him a chance to learn. Although Beta Persei had a headache whenever he talked about learning and even wanted to sleep, he could still understand some simple Mongolian words by staying by Yang Chendong's side every day. It was because he heard this voice that Beta Persei looked over and saw many people escorting a person down the city wall. Looking at the other party's clothes, he could tell that he was either rich or noble. "Hey, where are you going?" Beta Persei was not sure of the other party's true identity. He felt that it should not be simple, so he turned his horse around and rushed over with the celestial armament sword in hand. Beta Persei turned around and Qiu Vi, Dao Shao, and the others who followed him immediately followed. This caused the black cavalry to follow in large numbers. When Saihanhen saw all of this, he turned pale with fright. He thought that his identity had been exposed and immediately shouted, "Guards, stop them, stop them." There was no lack of loyal guards among the guards. After hearing Saihanhen's shout, hundreds of people rushed out with swords and spears. It looked quite imposing. However, these guards came in a hurry and did not even ride on war horses. How could they be a match for the most elite black cavalry in the 5-star army? In just a single exchange, dozens of heads and bodies were separated from their bodies. The impact of these hundreds of guards was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. The effect was really limited. This also allowed Beta Persei to quickly rush in front of Saihanhen. Saihanhen, the dignified great Khan of the clan, was in a very sorry state at this moment. He did not even swing his sword, even though he was already holding a sharp sword in his hand. Second Master Yang's big hand grabbed him and pressed him down on the horse. "No, don't kill me, I'm Saihanhen, I surrender." Saihanhen had just witnessed the scene of Beta Persei killing Tuyabai. At this moment, he was extremely scared and hurriedly begged for mercy in Mongolian. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Beta Persei did not understand so much Mongolian at once. In a fit of anger, he roared. At this moment, coupled with the murderous aura on his body, Saihanhen had the urge to faint. "Don't kill me, I'm Saihanhen, I'm the great Khan of the Norman Khanate. I'm willing to surrender, I surrender." In a hurry, Saihanhen could only repeat in Chinese. Although it was not very authentic and was even a little talkative, this time Beta Persei really heard it clearly. He did not expect that the person he casually grabbed would be the great Khan. He immediately laughed and said, God is really taking care of me. That's for the best. Tell your men to put down their weapons immediately. I'll chop off one of your fingers if they're late." Hearing Beta Persei's thunderous voice, Saihanhen kept nodding. "Yes, I'll tell them to surrender right away. Wait a moment." In order to save his life, Saihanhen sat on his horse and began to shout loudly in Mongolian. With his identity as the Khan, he ordered his men to put down their weapons and surrender to the 5-star army. The great Khan's orders still had a lot of prestige in the tribe. Perhaps if he told them to throw away their lives, they would still fuss about it. But if he said to surrender in order to save their lives, not many people would disobey the order. Especially when the 5-star army's performance was so brave and powerful. In addition, they had long heard all kinds of rumors about the five-star army's power. Immediately, everyone threw down their weapons and surrendered, squatting on the ground. When Barry and Yuchuo led the army into the city, they saw the scene of the entire city kneeling on the ground. This result shocked the two division commanders. When they looked at Beta Persei, their eyes were full of worship. With just 1,800 cavalrymen, not only did they charge into the city and capture the Khan, they also made the 10,000 cavalrymen surrender and kneel on the ground. If it didn't happen in front of their eyes, they wouldn't believe it even if someone else told them. On the contrary, Beta Persei, who was worshipped, was not surprised at all. Leading the most elite black cavalry of the five-star army, he would not be surprised at anything. Okay, immediately seal off the entire city. Don't spread the news here. Check the captured goods, especially the food, and be ready to attack again. Taking down the Norman Khanate was naturally not Beta Persei's ultimate goal. In his eyes, the real boss was the great Khan of the Timur Empire, Amur. As long as he captured him, the mission would be considered complete. Come, immediately report this matter to the young master. At the same time, inform him of our plan. Plan? Is it about the surprise attack on the Timur Empire? Captain Chiovi, who was following beside him, asked excitedly. That's right. Beta Persei nodded, and then his eyes were filled with excitement. If this matter could really be accomplished, then there was no doubt that this time he would be able to show his face. It would also be enough to prove that he was a real valiant general and not just a subordinate of the young master. In the main tent, the telegram was quickly sent to Yang Chendong. Director Wang Shan, who was in charge of delivering the telegram, also said excitedly, "Sixth young master, look, Brother Beta Persei has made a meritorious service again." That's right. His surprise attack was indeed very unexpected. It's just that. Yang Chendong did not say what it was. However, Wang Shan could sense that Yang Chendong was worried about whether or not he would be able to launch a surprise attack on the Timur Empire. Yang Chendong was indeed a little worried. After all, although the Norman Khanate had the name of a country, it was actually just a small tribe. The total army of the whole country was less than 100,000 people. They had also sent a large number of troops to support the eastern and main lines, so they basically did not have many troops in the capital. However, the Timur Empire was completely different. Their influence was so great that it was not inferior to the Golden Horde. Their capital, Herat, located in the northwest of Afghanistan, was heavily guarded. It was not a place that could be taken down easily. If things were not handled well, they might fall into a siege, which would be very dangerous. Yang Chendong was not a person who did not take risks, but that was because he had Datsang by his side, so he had no scruples. In contrast, Beta Persei only had a little more than 80,000 troops, so it would be very difficult for him to succeed. Sixth young master, how should I reply? Wang Shan saw that Yang Chendong did not speak for a long time, so he asked softly. Agree to Beta Persei's request. But tell him that it would be best if it can be done. If it can't be done, then immediately retreat, and I will personally pick him up. Yang Chendong's expression instantly became much more serious, and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Even Beta Persei was not afraid of danger, so what did he have to be afraid of? At worst, he could just use Datsang's power. Sixth young master wants to kiss him? Hearing Yang Chendong's answer, Wang Shan's eyes widened. Yes, in that case, immediately notify the Black Cavalry Group. We will prepare to set out tonight and meet up with the 2nd Division of the Cold Front. At this time, Yang Chendong had already made up his mind. If he wanted to do it, then he would do it big. He could even destroy the Golden Horde. So what was there to be afraid of with the Timur Empire? Yes. Wang Shan was also affected by this mood, and immediately stood at attention and went out to notify the others. At this time, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front that Yang Chendong had chosen had already fought with Harsenhan's army, and the results were very good. The 2nd Division of the Cold Front was surrounded, and with the help of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions of the 3rd Army, they dug out the trenches they needed overnight. Early the next morning, after Harsenhan ordered the 100,000 troops to attack, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front was in the limelight. They did not need the help of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions, and they easily repelled the enemy's attacks again and again. Chapter 1501. Under the barrage of muskets, not a single cavalryman was able to get within 300 steps of the trenches. The battle lasted from day to night. In the end, the Khaganate army left behind about 12,000 corpses before retreating helplessly. On the other hand, the Cold Front army didn't suffer a single casualty. In fact, the marksmanship of the soldiers was even better. It was said that sharpshooters were trained by bullets, but that was only true for fixed targets. Occasionally, there would be moving targets. For example, a real target like this was something that even the sharpshooters of the future envied. In order to train the soldiers' marksmanship and take into account that the enemy's charge wasn't too loud, Commander Xiao Feng conducted actual combat training in units of battalions. Not only did this save bullets to a certain extent, it also preserved the soldiers' stamina to the greatest extent. They were surrounded on all sides and had only sent out 4 battalions of soldiers. In this kind of battlefield, they would have no problem holding out for a long time. Not to mention, before they were surrounded, they had brought 20 days' worth of rations. Unlike the Mongolian army, they had instant noodles, biscuits, ham sausages, canned food, and so on. Even if they didn't have a chance to start a fire, they could still eat until they were full. This was the best way to preserve their stamina and fighting spirit. Seeing that Cold Front's 2nd Regiment had killed more enemies than their entire regiment, the 1st Regiment's commander Min Fu and the 2nd Regiment's commander Lori were envious. They came up to Xiao Feng and asked sincerely, "General Xiao, our commander has sent a telegram saying that he's on his way with the army, but we don't know when we'll launch our counterattack." "There's no rush." Xiao Feng, who carried the rank of Major General, smiled and shook his head. It was rare to have an opportunity like this to train the soldiers. He wanted to let the soldiers of the division go through a sieve. This would be a great help in increasing the fighting strength of the division. Although they were all division commanders, the Cold Front Division's commander had the rank of Major General. Only they and the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army could enjoy this kind of treatment. This was enough to prove the strength of the 2 armies. On the other hand, the other division commanders were at most senior colonels. In comparison, the difference in status between the 2 sides was obvious. Even though Major General Xiao Feng said this, Min Fu and Lorui, who were also division commanders but only had the rank of 2 bars and 4 bars, couldn't say anything. When it was almost daybreak, the 2 division commanders were suddenly called into the tent by Xiao Feng. Through their narration, the decision made last night was changed. "Commander Min, Commander Luo, please get ready. Let the soldiers eat in advance and prepare for the counterattack." The reason why the situation changed so quickly was naturally not only because the 3rd Corps commander Wu Sheng had already brought the main force of the army to the periphery of the battlefield, ready to provide support at any time. The main reason was that Yang Chendong had sent a telegram. No one in the 5-star army had the right to question or be dissatisfied with Yang Chendong's orders. This was a kind of respect, a kind of prestige accumulated over a long period of battle. There was another mission for him to finish the battle as quickly as possible. As soon as the telegram was delivered, Xiao Feng knew what to do next. He then called for Min Fu and the other 2 teachers to discuss the matter of counterattacking. The 3 division commanders sat together. The candlelight in the tent was lit for half an hour until the messenger came to report that the soldiers had already eaten breakfast and could attack at any time. The 3 division commanders looked at each other and nodded heavily. After telling each other to pay attention to safety, they walked out of the tent. Outside the encirclement, Harsenhan's face was a bit ugly. He only went to sleep at midnight, but even so, he still tossed and turned in bed for nearly an hour before falling asleep. It wasn't strange for him to have such a performance. He thought that he had the upper hand, but after attacking for a day, not only did he lose 15% of his strength, he didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was the first time he had encountered such a battle in his life. Even when facing the 5-star army in the east, Although they were defeated time and time again, they were still able to injure some of the enemy. It wasn't like this time. They were clearly the attacking side, but they could only passively take a beating. He found a few of his subordinates to discuss until midnight, but they still couldn't come up with a better plan. Everyone finally decided to observe carefully the next day to see if they could find a direction to attack. Only then did they go to sleep. At this time, the sky was beginning to brighten. But even so, Harsin Han still didn't have the intention to get up. He didn't sleep well last night, so he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to sleep a little longer to ensure that he had enough energy to deal with various matters during the day. Harsin Han, who did not want to get out of bed, was about to lie down for a while. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound rang out beside his ear. Following that, he felt the bedboard shake. The huge explosion caused him to be unable to sleep peacefully. What's going on? What's going on? The frightened Harsin Han got off the bed with his clothes in disarray. He rushed out of the tent and wanted to ask the guard outside what was going on outside. However, what he saw next made him unable to ask any more questions. He could see with his own eyes the cannonballs exploding within the camp, destroying one tent after another. One of the cannonballs was less than 40 steps away from his main tent. Standing in front of the main tent, he could even feel the shockwave from the explosion. In comparison, the surrounding Mongol soldiers weren't much better off. Some of them were directly hit by the cannonballs, and some of them were injured by the shrapnel. Although they didn't die immediately, they breathed out more than they breathed in. Of course, most of them were those who had suffered minor injuries. They were bleeding. The wounds were not big, and there was only a small piece of shrapnel embedded in their bodies. However, if the shrapnel was not taken out, the prolonged bleeding would eventually kill them. It could be said that there was no safe place to hide under the cannonballs. When the cannonballs landed on the Mongol camp, it was already a mess. The general didn't give any orders, and the soldiers didn't have the will to fight. Where did the cannonballs come from? Didn't you say that the cannonballs of the 5-star army weren't surrounded by us? Seeing the hellish scene in front of him, Harsin Han angrily asked. A few generals who had run to the main tent lowered their heads. Previously, because the cannonballs of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment were well hidden within the army, and because they didn't encounter any cannonballs yesterday, they were certain of this. But now, it seemed like they had been tricked. Harsin Han, who had vented his anger, knew that this wasn't the time to ask for responsibility. He said, "Go back to the army and think of a way to gather the troops. Be prepared for battle. This Khan is thinking that the cannonballs are just a prelude. Perhaps their real counterattack is coming." Counterattack? They only have 30,000 men, and we have 80,000. Will they counterattack? This sentence attracted the suspicion of the generals. Even at this time, his subordinates still doubted his words. This made Harsin Han very angry. He knew that it was because of his usual actions that his subordinates didn't trust him. If he wanted them to listen to him, he had to negotiate with them. As such, he had to change his tone and explain patiently. It was because of this explanation that the Mongol army lost the most crucial time. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. Sometimes, every minute and second on the battlefield was the key to victory. While Harsin Han was explaining to his subordinates, the first round of cannonballs of the 5-star army had ended. Following that, the cavalry began their charge. The 20,000 cavalry of the 2 mixed cavalry divisions had long been envious of the achievements of the 5-star army. Now, it was finally their turn to perform. One by one, they galloped forward on their horses and shouted loudly. They also wanted to make a name for themselves. Great Khan, the 5-star army has indeed launched a counterattack. A young scout rode up to Harsin Han and reported the situation in a loud voice. Facts spoke louder than words. Harsin Han had said a lot earlier, but the generals didn't believe him. However, the facts had slapped them in the face. When the generals looked at Harsin Han, they all revealed looks of admiration. This time, there was no need to say anything. The generals dispersed and began to gather their troops. The Mongol soldiers also had a certain amount of battle experience. When they saw the 5-star Legion Corps charging over, even without the command of their general, many of them were already prepared to charge. They turned their horses around and mounted their horses. They were prepared to engage in a bloody battle with the 5-star army at any time. Commander, the Mongol army's attention is on the interior. This is the time for us to charge. The 3rd Corps Nuzan Cavalry Division's commander Yella had already moved to the periphery of the Mongol army. At this time, he stood beside Wu Sheng and asked for instructions. Good, give the order. All troops attack. Wu Sheng, who couldn't wait any longer, how could he not want to make a name for himself? Previously, under the pincer attack of the Golden Horde and the Ross Dukedom, they could only barely hold their ground. Now that they finally had a chance to make a name for themselves, how could he give it up? With a loud shout, he led his 3 divisions and 30,000 soldiers to charge towards the Mongol army from different directions. At this time, the Mongol army's main focus was on the 5-star army that was surrounded. Although they had arranged for some troops to be stationed at the outer perimeter, it was to prevent the other 5-star Corps reinforcements from suddenly appearing and attacking them from both sides. However, with the chaos in the camp and the generals not returning in time, these soldiers had long forgotten about their previous mission. They only wanted to solve the problem in front of them. Now, there was no one to defend behind them. When Wu Sheng appeared with his army, they were caught off guard. Chapter 1502. On the battlefield, the slightest accident could cost a person's life. The enemy troops suddenly appeared behind them, and they were charging ferociously. At this moment, the Mongol army had no choice but to send out a portion of their forces to block them. At this moment, the second wave of cannon fire arrived, causing the Mongol army, who had just regained their order, to fall into chaos once more. The timing was really accurate, and it could be said to be perfect. The cannon fire disrupted the order of the Mongol army, and it also covered the shouts of the Mongol generals, causing them to be unable to gather their troops. In just 15 minutes, the 5-star army had formed a pincer attack. Facing such a situation, many of the Mongol soldiers were confused as to who they should fight. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy had not formed a defensive formation, Wu Sheng's 3rd Legion charged into the Mongol army like a sharp blade, and they started their massacre. The reason why cavalry was so terrifying and had dominated the battlefield for a whole decade and a century was precisely because they were fast enough, their charge was fierce enough, and their lethality and destructive power were shocking and terrifying. Once they lost these advantages, they were no different from ordinary infantry waiting to be slaughtered. Without impulse, there would be no speed. Without speed, they would not be able to display their strength. Without strength, there would be no killing power and no destructive power. They were just riding on horses. Facing the soldiers of the 3rd Legion, in just one exchange, the Mongol army was cut down, and over 1,000 of them were injured. As the main force of the 3rd Legion continued to charge into the Mongol army, the number of casualties continued to increase. Block it, block it. Harsan Han also saw this shocking scene. When he saw the cavalrymen, he was proud of being killed off one by one without the slightest ability to resist. He cried out in pain. The various khans were like a chaotic animal kingdom, and there was only one rule of survival, which was the survival of the fittest. Whoever had the biggest fist was the boss, and this was what the Mongol army, which did not have much culture, valued. The reason why he could still make his voice heard in the Khaganate alliance was because he had these cavalry units. This was the fundamental reason why no one could ignore his existence. But now, these cavalrymen that he regarded as his lifeblood couldn't even withstand a single blow from the 5-star army. They were harvested like chives, and it was as if his flesh was being cut off. It made him feel extremely miserable. We can't block them anymore, Khan, let's break out. The captain brought a group of soldiers in front of Harsan Han and begged. On the battlefield, once defeat was apparent, it was not something that could be changed by a single person's decision. That was the situation, and in front of such a situation, even Khan was like a leaf blown by the wind. We can't block them? Harsan Han murmured. Then, as if he had thought of something, his vision blurred, and he fell to the ground at an extremely fast speed. Not good, Khan fainted. Quickly come and help Khan up, we'll kill our way out. Seeing this scene, the captain of the bodyguards shouted in panic. Soon after, a group of bodyguards rushed forward and helped Harsin Han, who had indeed fainted from anger, onto his warhorse. After that, the group of bodyguards charged towards the direction where the 5-star army had fewer soldiers. The army was defeated like a landslide. From the moment the 3rd-star army launched a pincer attack, and the enemy was helpless, the outcome of this battle was already decided. One side was meticulously planned, and the other side was forced to retaliate. This was equivalent to a country suddenly launching an attack. Furthermore, they did not declare war, and they had an even greater advantage in firepower. This battle only lasted for 8 hours, and before the sky turned dark, the battlefield was already filled with corpses and Mongolian prisoners. There were more than 80,000 Mongolian cavaliers, and after the battle, aside from nearly 10,000 who managed to escape in the chaos, around 13,000 died, 20,000 were injured, and the remaining 30,000 or so abandoned their weapons and knelt down to surrender. On the other hand, the 3rd-star army lost less than 500 men, and about 4,000 were injured. With such a small sacrifice, they managed to kill 80,000 enemies. Other than the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, this also showed the strength of the 3rd-star army. Clean up the battlefield and send a report to the 6th Young Master. At the same time, ask for other allies to come and take care of the prisoners. Wu Sheng, who had obtained a great victory, was elated as he gave the order to the reporter beside him. From the fact that Yang Chendong wanted to use the 2nd Cold Front Division, it was obvious that something big was going to happen. Wu Sheng did not want to miss such a good opportunity. He did not forget that the 3rd-star army used to be the 3rd Cold Front Division, but because they had not returned for a long time, they had lost all their firearms. However, it did not matter. As long as they performed well enough, they would be able to return to the ranks of the Cold Front Division. At that time, the 3rd-star army would be truly powerful. Yang Chendong, who was rushing over, heard about the situation here through a telegram. He immediately gave the order to report this matter to the entire army. At the same time, he ordered the nearby 3rd-star army, Chiwen, to immediately rush over to the 3rd-star army and the 2nd Cold Front Division to take over everything there. If it was said that Yang Chendong was still somewhat hesitant when Beta Persei suggested to attack the capital of the Timur Empire, Tut, then this victory gave him more confidence. He knew that the conditions of the battlefield had been formed, and it was time to complete the surprise attack. With the help of the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd-star army obtained a great victory over the Mongolian army, defeating 100,000 enemies. After this news was spread through the telegram, the commander of the 1st-star army's 4th Division, Su Kuda, became anxious. Speaking of which, they had clashed with the enemy's main force earlier than anyone else. Moreover, they had also launched several attacks, but the results did not seem to be very good. Although from the results of the battle, they had always had the upper hand, but they did not achieve their goal of heavily injuring the enemy. We can't continue like this. Isn't the 1st-star army less than 200 li away from here? Send a message to them to come and support us. Su could have finally decided to send other reinforcements. This was not because he was afraid of the enemy, but because he wanted to use more advantages to annihilate the enemy. Just from this point alone, he already had the qualities of an excellent commander. He no longer cared about the fruits of victory in front of him. He was willing to share the credit with other allies, which was equivalent to having a view of the overall situation. Su Kuda was also preparing for the final attack. In contrast, Commander Tian, who had already obtained the fruits of victory. Under his surprise attack, he had successfully captured the capital of the Ilkhanate, Tabuli Tuching. In order to achieve the goal of not letting the news leak out, the 4 divisions of the army attacked the 4 gates to ensure that no one could escape the city and spread the news. The world's #1 cavalry army was indeed worthy of being an existence that was second only to the Black Cavalry in terms of cold weapons. From the moment they launched their attack to the moment they captured the entire Tabuli Tuching, they had only used less than 4 hours. Furthermore, they had achieved their goal of not letting a single enemy escape. After quietly capturing the city, Tianhu did not let the army take down the old flag of the Ilkhanate. On the surface, the city did not look any different from before. This was him fishing, waiting for the enemy to walk into the trap. Although Tianhu did not know who would appear here, his intuition and the pattern of the battle told him that there would definitely be enemies here. After 6 days, not a single enemy appeared. Instead, many Mongolian soldiers and civilians were executed because they were hostile to the 5-star army. Letting the world's #1 cavalry army do the work of a third-rate army was indeed a waste of talent. Some of the soldiers had their own opinions about this. Looking at the battlefield, the other Allied forces had already made contributions, but the world's #1 cavalry army had only chosen to wait, making them feel sullen. Regarding this, Tianhu used his aura to suppress it. However, at this moment, his heart wavered a little. If he only obtained this bit of merit in this battle, then he was somewhat unqualified to be a commander. Finally, on the morning of the 7th day, the scouts outside the city reported that they had seen a large number of Mongolian soldiers outside the city. At this time, they were moving in the direction of the city. Hearing that there was finally an enemy who had taken the bait, Tianhu immediately became spirited. The 5-star army soldiers in the city also changed from their previous dispirited state to full of vigor. At this time, about 5 li away from the city, a group of about 30,000 people was slowly making their way into the city. Leading them was the Ivan Khanate's Harsan Khan, as well as the 20,000 Kazakh Khanate cavalry led by Alating. After the defeat, Harsan Khan had killed his way out of the encirclement under the protection of his personal guards. Following that, he gathered the remaining soldiers and gathered about 10,000 people. After that, he met the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry who were coming to support him. Thus, he mixed them into one army and retreated to Tabuli Tuching. At the same time, he reorganized his army and looked for an opportunity to fight again. Harsan Khan did not admit defeat because he did not know what had happened on the other battlefields. He only thought that it was his own army that had lost. Then he still had 200,000 cavalry at his disposal. Moreover, as long as he could hold on, the other Khanates might continue to send reinforcements. Harsan Khan was not discouraged as there was still hope to turn defeat into victory. Gathering the 20,000 Kazakh cavalry was the first step. The 30,000 cavalry, under the leadership of Harsan Khan, turned around and headed towards Tabuli Tuching. At this time, no one would have thought that their base was no longer under their control and had become a graveyard. After knowing the exact number of enemies, Tianhu knew that it was not realistic to want to destroy them in the city. Once the enemy found out that the commander guarding the city had changed, he was afraid that the first thing they would do was to escape. Thus, he had waited for 6 days in vain. This result was unacceptable to Tianhu. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.